Chapter 679. Outside Yi Pavilion. Qin Yining boarded the carriage and sat in the middle. Zhao Wanjin and Zhao Yinhua sat on either side of him. Zhao Yinhua retracted his gaze from Yi Pavilion's main entrance and sneered. That librarian Gao seems to be used to acting like a tyrant. I didn't expect him to personally bring people here so soon. From the looks of it, it doesn't seem like he's here to capture someone, but to kill someone. He's the only heir in his family. With that kick of mine, I'm afraid that the Gao clan will have no descendants. It'd be strange if that Gao guy didn't go crazy. Big brother, you're really ruthless. The Alliance head only said to hit him harder, but you actually crippled him. Just looking at that kind of bastard makes me angry. If I don't cripple him now, he'll definitely harm others in the future. The two brothers looked at Qin Yining at the same time. In reality, they were also somewhat nervous. Qin Yining had indeed ordered them to make a big fuss today and teach that hedonistic young master a lesson. However, he didn't say that they would end his family line. After all, this kind of result could be said to be a devastating blow to any man. It would directly cause Librarian Gao's hatred for them to skyrocket. Seeing how nervous they were, Qin Yining laughed and said, "What's done is done. What's done is done. There's no point in thinking too much about it. Alliance head, I'm really sorry." Zhao Wanjin scratched his head and smiled honestly. If I hadn't been impulsive, things wouldn't have turned out this way. It's fine. Qin Yining said, "Young Master Gao deserved it. You didn't indiscriminately kill the innocent. Even if you beat him to death today, you'll only be enforcing justice on behalf of the heavens. There'll be one less scum in the world. Moreover, you only crippled him. Regardless of whether we crippled him or not, Librarian Gao's anger will be enough for him to step into our trap." Zhao Wanjin sighed in relief when he heard Qin Yining's analysis. Qin Yining said, "I've already told you the details of the plan. Things should develop according to our plan. You just need to act according to plan." "Understood. Don't worry, Alliance head. I'll definitely handle this matter well. I won't leave any loopholes." "That's good. From tomorrow onwards, the kanji factory would prepare some mixed grains and dry rations. The kanji would be cooked thicker, and some pickled vegetables would be prepared for distribution. If they can't eat salt for a long time, the people won't have any strength." "Yes." Zhao Wanjin and Zhao Yinhua replied in unison. Zhao Wanjin smiled and said, "With Alliance head's arrangement, won't everyone be overjoyed eating? In all my life, I've never seen anyone give porridge with dried food and pickled vegetables. No matter what, it's a good thing." Qin Yining was actually very satisfied. Back when she was living in the mountains, she had hoped countless times that someone would come to Liang City to provide relief so that she wouldn't have to suffer so much. However, what he was looking forward to never happened. Now that she had the ability and the output of the farm was not insufficient, if she followed the plan, she would be able to save her grandmother. Why not? Zhao Wanjin and Zhao Yinhua both laughed. The carriage traveled to Qin Manor for a while before Zhao Wanjin asked, "Alliance head, what do you plan to do with the two girls from the Yu family?" Qin Yining said, "Since we've already saved them, we'll help them to the end. They look like flowers. If we send them out, they might be abducted again. That's why I plan to keep them in Qin Manor as servant girls. I don't know if they're willing." "Alliance head is very kind," Zhao Wanjin said. "They've lived in each pavilion before. Now that they can live openly, I'm sure they won't object to being servants." "I hope so." Qin Yining also smiled. She no longer expected or asked others to do as she wished, so she didn't plan to force Yushifan. If they're not willing to be servants, I can only let them go. If they leave my side, who knows what kind of danger they'll encounter. At least they'll be safer if they stay by my side. Of course, it's not good for us to persuade them too much, lest someone misunderstands and thinks I'm a human trafficker. Wouldn't I be wrong then? Zhao Wanjin and Zhao Yinhua both laughed. By the time they returned to Qin Manor, it was already 7 in the evening. The night wind blew down with snowflakes, landing on the heads and shoulders of the group of people. It was so cold that Qin Yining couldn't help but shiver. She didn't go directly to see the two children, afraid that the coldness from her body would spread to them and cause them to fall ill. She simply asked the sisters Yu Fong and Yu Shirwei to come forward and talk. Yu Fong and Yu Sirui had already washed their faces and changed into green cotton short jackets and trousers of the same color prepared by the Fu for the servants. They also wore light pink long sleeves on the outside. When they saw Qin Yining, they knelt down gratefully and bowed. When Yu Shirwei saw her elder sister like this, she also respectfully bowed. Qin Yining smiled. Although she was still wearing men's clothing, her voice had already returned to its usual delicate and reserved tone. Rise. Don't be so courteous. Yu Fong saw Qin Yining was wearing men's clothing and lazily leaning against the armrest of the chair. She didn't have any pretentious air. With this kind of otherworldly aura and the manner they were in right now, if she couldn't guess who Qin Yining was, then she would have lived in vain. Many thanks to Wang Fei for saving our lives. Yu Fong pulled Yu Shirwei and bowed to Qin Yining again. Yu Shirwei didn't understand her elder sister's meaning. She paused for a moment before saying, "Many thanks to Wang Fei for saving our lives." Qin Yining had Bing Tang and Ji Yin help the two up. Don't be so courteous. This was just something I did in passing. What plans do you have in the future? Qin Yining asked gently. Yu Fong hadn't thought that Qin Yining wouldn't take credit for saving them. She felt even more emotional. She had already decided that Zhongshuan Qin Wang Fei was a kind person. She bit her lip and made up her mind to kneel down with a thump. Wang Fei, today's matter has been blown up. Historian Gao already knows that the cause of the matter was me. If I go out, I'm afraid I will be caught before I reach the city gates. Wang Fei, you don't know, but 8 out of 10 people locked up in the prison of the old capital are innocent. Historian Gao will have people do bad things in secret. If I'm caught, I'm afraid. I know that Wang Fei saved us sisters today and used so much money. You have already done your duty. But I still want to ask Wang Fei to protect us sisters. Yu Fong immediately kowtowed to Qin Yining. Qin Yining waved his hand and indicated for Ji Yun to help the two up again. He said, I have 2 ways. One is for you to stay in my Fu. This large Fu doesn't have many women like you. Also, if you want to leave the old capital, I can give you some traveling expenses and escort you out of the city gates. I didn't bring you here to make you slaves or servants. It's up to you to decide what you want to do. However, I still want to remind you that young Master Gao is probably crippled this time. If you want to leave, you must go far away. You must not let Historian Gao's people find you. How could Yu Fong not understand this logic? She originally wanted to seek refuge with Qin Yining. She was afraid that a noble family like him would look down on maidservants who came from an unorthodox background. Now that Qin Yining was willing to open his mouth, Yu Fong couldn't be more happy. Many thanks, Wang Fei. Many thanks, Wang Fei. There's no one else in my family. It's just us sisters who depend on each other. Even if Wang Fei gives us traveling expenses and sends us away, if we meet a bad person outside, we won't be able to survive. We sisters will never forget Wang Fei's kindness in saving our lives. Even if we have to go through water and tread on fire, we will repay you. We are willing to be servants in Wang Fei's Fu and obey your orders. We will never betray you. Yu Fong pulled her younger sister and kowtowed 3 times to Qin Yining. Qin Yining then said, all right. You must not kowtow anymore. Since you decided to stay, then stay. Today, follow Yu Yun to settle down. Tomorrow, Yu Yun will arrange a leisurely job for you in the residence. You can also learn the rules of the academy while you're at it. Yes. Also, don't leave the Fu if you can. Otherwise, you will be caught by Historian Gao. Yes. This servant obeys. Qin Yining saw that the 2 sisters were a little tired, so he let Ji Yun take them away. After Ji Yun and the 2 maidservants walked far away, Bing Tang helped Qin Yining put on a cloak while serving her to the bedroom. He smiled and joked. Wang Fei went to take a stroll. Downstairs, he actually gained 2 beautiful maidservants. If Wang Yi knew, wouldn't he gasp in amazement? Talkative. Qin Yining pinched Bing Tang's cheeks. The 2 of them chatted and laughed as they first went to change clothes and wash up. Then, they went to accompany the 2 children. Just as Qin Fu was at peace, the Gao family in the middle of the night was already in chaos. Young Master Gao's family jewels were completely ruined this time. Librarian Gao even kidnapped an old imperial physician who lived in the old capital to treat young Master Gao's illness. The old imperial physician had no idea what to do, and young Master Gao had already fainted from a high fever. Historian Gao was so angry that the roots of his teeth itched. Did you find out? That old procuress did not deceive us. Replying to Master, the old procuress spoke the truth. The people who accompanied young Master and the women who were serving in the brothel at the time have all been asked. The person who injured young Master was indeed the one surnamed Qian who recently opened the kanji factory to distribute kanji. They said that it was because of a fight over a young lady named Lame. That surnamed Qian drank too much and fought with young Master. What a surnamed Qian! Historian Gao gritted his teeth. When he thought about how his son was a womanizer and was simply one of the best among the younger generation in the old capital, Historian Gao felt a wave of disappointment in his son's failure to live up to his expectations. But no matter what, he still had to save his son and take revenge. The next day, Zhao Wanjin and Qin Yining talked in low voices for a while. Qin Yining told Zhao Wanjin everything that needed to be told. Zhao Wanjin had a rough idea of what to do and ordered people to prepare the kanji factory. Today's kanji was especially thick. Even a pair of chopsticks could be casually thrown in. Everyone was also given a piece of mixed grain flatbread and a strip of pickled vegetables. The commoners had come early in the morning to line up. When they saw such good food, they all wolfed it down. They were so moved that their eyes brimmed with tears. They repeatedly said that philanthropist Qian was the kindest person in the world. Chapter 680. Arrest. Thank you, philanthropist Qian. We can't even remember how long it has been since we ate so much. Philanthropist Qian is truly the reincarnation of Bodhisattva. In the future, I will definitely set up a long-life memorial tablet for you and pray that you will be safe and sound. The commoners who received the food were all moved to tears as they spoke words of gratitude and jixiang. Zhao Wanjin had been appearing at the kanji factory every day for the past few days, so he was already familiar with the commoners. As he served the kanji, he spoke words of comfort. However, the commoners were too enthusiastic. Some elders, women, and children even knelt down and kowtowed to him. With someone taking the lead, the commoners who were filled with gratitude but did not know how to express it all knelt down one after another. Some bowed, some kowtowed. Everyone was grateful to Zhao Wanjin. Zhao Wanjin's heart surged. He walked around the big pot and helped up a few elders who were closer to him. He then instructed everyone, quickly get up, quickly get up. There are still elders among you, so don't make me feel bad. I am a straightforward person, and my temper is also straightforward. My family is not particularly rich and can only be considered a small amount. I'm also passing by here to do business. What I can't stand the most is other people suffering. After the disaster, everyone still has not eaten their fill. There are even children and elders who have starved to death on the streets. Do you think I can stand by and watch? The imperial court is currently resisting the invasion of the Taytan in the north. It is a tense time, so it is normal for them to not be able to take care of it. Since I can still afford it, I naturally have to shoulder it. Zhao Wanjin bowed as he spoke. The commoners were moved to tears as they said in an uproar, "Thank you, philanthropist Qian." Zhao Wanjin seemed to be embarrassed by everyone's praise. He scratched his head and said, "I can't afford to treat everyone to good food, so I can only give you the simplest food. Even if the taste isn't good, I can at least fill you up. Everyone, don't be polite and eat while it's hot." "Thank you, philanthropist." "Philanthropist, you are too kind." The pancakes in their hands were still warm. When they took a bite, the soft texture and the unique aroma of grains immediately filled their mouths. The more they chewed, the more fragrant it became. There was also a hint of sweetness in the aroma of the grains. At this time, when they took a bite of the salted vegetables and a mouthful of the porridge, the warmth really spread from their stomachs to their whole body in the cold winter. For a moment, there were 1,000 people in the square, but only one sound could be heard. That was the sound of chewing and slurping when eating porridge. When Qin Yining saw that Zhao Wanjin's words had moved the commoners, he felt happy as well. Even if the reason she gave out the porridge was to save her grandmother, Qin Yining felt unprecedentedly satisfied that she could help so many people survive the cold and hungry winter. At this moment, a burst of noise suddenly came from the direction of the main street behind the crowd of commoners. They could vaguely hear curses and the exclamations of the commoners when they were pushed aside. Qin Yining, who was hiding in the carriage, narrowed her eyes and lifted the curtain to look outside. When she saw who it was, she knew that her plan had succeeded. Zhao Wanjin also saw who it was. He saw that the leader was a thin man with a dark face. The skin on his face was sagging, and the wrinkles on his eyebrows and the deep wrinkles under his eyes made his already unfriendly face look even more gloomy. Looking at the way he was dressed and the dozen or so local bailiffs behind him, it was clear that he was Historian Gao. Historian Gao led the crowd forward. When he encountered the commoners who did not react in time, he naturally did not have the patience to remind them. Historian Gao's subordinates immediately slapped them and pushed them away without hesitation. There were even some old people who walked slowly who were kicked mercilessly. Zhao Wanjin calmly smiled and stood in place waiting for Historian Gao with his hands by his side. Historian Gao led the dozen or so subordinates and separated the crowd as they headed straight for Zhao Wanjin. The commoners who were holding the porridge bowls and dried food all stopped eating and looked in confusion at Historian Gao and his subordinates. They did not know why these people would suddenly come to the porridge factory. The locals all knew how powerful Historian Gao and his subordinates were. They did not think that these people had good intentions. Usually, even if they starved to death, they would not see Historian Gao blink. Today, it must not be a good thing. Just when the scene was silent, Zhao Wanjin smiled and cupped his hands at Historian Gao. "Officer, I." Before he finished speaking, he was met with a loud slap, which directly slapped Zhao Wanjin's face to the side. Zhao Wanjin was shocked. He covered his face and looked at Historian Gao. Why did you hit me?" Historian Gao's eyes were red. He gritted his teeth and did not say a word. He raised his hand and slapped him again. Zhao Wanjin and Qin Yining had privately studied Historian Gao's reaction, so he was prepared to go all out and suffer some superficial wounds. He was secretly determined to teach this grandson a lesson in the future. At this time, he only pretended to be afraid and screamed in horror. "What are you doing? What right do you have to hit me?" Without another word, Librarian Gao continuously slapped Zhao Wanjin's face several times. In the end, he still couldn't vent his anger and kicked Zhao Wanjin's stomach, sending him flying into the crowd. "Tie him up and take him away." "Yes." As soon as Historian Gao gave the order, his subordinates immediately did as they were told. At this time, the commoners had already recovered from their shock. They saw that the great benefactor who had given them food to eat was slapped in the face for no reason and kicked to the ground, unable to get up for a long time. Everyone was already beyond angry. Even if they knew what kind of person Historian Gao was, at this moment, the commoners who were full of anger were not afraid at all and shouted loudly. "What right do you have to hit him? What did philanthropist Qian do wrong? Why did you hit him? Why did you catch him? We are hungry and cold. We won't be able to survive this winter. I don't see any officials coming to help us. We finally found a philanthropist who gave us food, but the officials came out to hit him. What kind of logic is this?" The discontent of over 1,000 people turned into curses and voices of injustice. One could see just how noisy it was. Dark clouds covered the old capital. In this empty square, one could even hear the echoes of the people's curses. Historian Gao's heart was filled with thoughts of his crippled son. At this time, he only wanted Qian Gue to taste the same pain. How could he care about what the commoners thought? Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation, the deafening curses were nothing to Dianshi Gao. He walked quickly, and the constables and attendants behind him did not dare to delay. Some of them held down the unconscious Zhao Wanjin, while others went in front of Dianshi Gao to open a path, pushing the agitated crowd away. When the commoners saw this scene, they finally could not control themselves. They did not care about the food in their hands. People pushed against each other, and people rushed in Historian Gao's direction. After these days of giving out porridge, the number of people who heard the news had increased. There were over 1,000 commoners gathered in this small square. How could Historian Gao and the dozen or so bailiffs fight against the crowd? Before they could leave with the unconscious culprit, they had already almost been pushed over. In a moment of desperation, Diensher Gao unsheathed his saber with a clang. The gleaming silver blade was so dazzling under the pale winter sun that it made people squint their eyes. Who dares to move? I want to see who dares to move. With Historian Gao taking the lead, his subordinates also pulled out their swords and pointed them at the commoners who were about to rush forward. With the cold blades pointed at them, the commoners in front did not dare to move forward. The people behind did not dare to push for fear of harming other people's lives. There were commoners who loudly shouted, "Don't push, don't push." They pulled out their swords. The words "pull out their swords" made the crowd even angrier. Their angry roars were mixed in with the light snow that suddenly blew up. What right do you have to arrest people? What crime did philanthropist Qian commit? Speak clearly. If there is no evidence, we will not let philanthropist Qian leave here. The commoners were filled with righteous indignation and had already become a chaotic mess. Historian Gao gave a cold smile and used his sword to gesture around. If you want to ask, then I'll tell you. This person is a wanted criminal by the imperial court, and he killed someone. We are here on orders to arrest the criminal and interrogate him. You are blocking our way here. Could it be that you are his accomplices? Impossible. How could philanthropist Qian kill people? He gives us food and clothes to eat and clothes to wear. He treats us better than our own parents. So how could he kill people? There must be a problem here. Philanthropist Qian would not kill people. Historian Gao gave a cold smile. Won't kill people? Could it be that a murderer would carve words on his forehead? This official is here on orders, so don't try to cause trouble. Otherwise, you will all be treated as accomplices and be beheaded. The commoners were shocked by Historian Gao's words. Since ancient times, the common people did not fight with the officials. These common people were used to being bullied. It was already the limit for them to stand up for philanthropist Qian out of loyalty. Now, the officials said that they would be beheaded as accomplices. These words really scared them. No one dared to say anything because they were afraid of being caught and killed. But the anger in their eyes was real. Historian Gao gave a cold snort and pushed aside the people blocking his way. He waved his sword like he was driving away mosquitoes, driving away the commoners blocking his way. His subordinates also followed suit. The commoners were intimidated by the sword, and no one dared to use their own flesh and blood to block the sword. They could not win in words or fight, so they could only watch as Historian Gao took away the unconscious philanthropist Qian. Historian Gao and his group of 10 people disappeared from sight. For a long time, no one said anything. Chapter 681. Qin Yining's brows were tightly furrowed as she looked worriedly in the direction that Historian Gao and the others had left. When she and Zhao Wanjin decided on the plan, she knew that Historian Gao would not be kind when he saw Zhao Wanjin. A few slaps and kicks would be light. She was afraid that there would be more torture waiting for Zhao Wanjin in the future. She felt a bit guilty and couldn't bear it, but Zhao Wanjin patted his chest and said, "I hate these cruel officials who prey on the people the most. To be able to take down these people and get the old Alliance head out, I'll only get some superficial wounds. This is a good deal. Alliance head doesn't know my internal martial arts. When I use it, they won't be able to hurt me. Alliance head, don't worry." Qin Yining was still worried, but when she hesitated, Zhao Wanjin and Zhao Yinhuo both promised her. Qin Yining saw that Zhao Yinhuo was even more certain than Zhao Wanjin and believed her. But now that Zhao Wanjin had been taken away, she was still worried. "Bing Tang, go back and prepare the medicine. We'll send it in at any time." Bing Tang nodded and pulled Qin Yining's cloak tighter around her arm. "Wang Fei, don't worry. I've already done everything according to your orders." "That's good." Qin Yining finally relaxed a bit. At this time, the people in the square came back to their senses and were in an uproar. These cruel officials of the old capital had never cared about their lives. Every time the imperial court gave out aid, it would first fill the pockets of these scum. Now, a kind person had finally come and was willing to buy food and clothes for these people who didn't even know them. Many people had been pulled back from the brink of starvation or freezing to death. Zhao Wanjin was their second parent. Seeing such a good person being treated like this, who knew how much hardship he would have to suffer in the Yamen. How could the people sit still? Everyone was shouting and cursing the cruel and corrupt officials. Zhao Yinhua stood in Zhao Wanjin's position with a bitter face. Fellow villagers, elders, please listen to me. Everyone was silent and looked in front of them in confusion. Zhao Yinhua rubbed her reddened eyes and said loudly, I am the head shopkeeper of Boss Qian's family. Everyone has seen the current situation. Our boss has been captured, and we don't know if he's dead or alive. If we can't bring him back safe and sound, I won't have the face to see my family's old master. Therefore, this kanji factory probably did not have the energy to continue operating. Everyone, hurry up and eat while it's still hot. Let's disperse early. When everyone heard this, the disappointment in their eyes could hardly be concealed. No matter who it was, when they saw a glimmer of hope for survival and were suddenly told that they would not continue to help them in the future, their negative emotions would surge. However, after seeing how philanthropist Qian was taken away with their own eyes, it was hard for them to resent the person who spoke. Philanthropist Qian was arrested, and there was no one in charge of the family. The servants were busy trying to use their connections to save the master. It was understandable that they had no time and energy to take care of the porridge factory. If there was someone to blame, it was the cruel official who took away philanthropist Qian. The thick porridge in the bowls and the dry rations in the hands of the commoners were already cold. They were all stunned on the spot, not knowing what to do. After eating today's meal, would they have no hope tomorrow? They originally had a glimmer of hope that they could survive this harsh winter. However, once philanthropist Qian was arrested, where could they find such a kind-hearted and wealthy person? Their hope of survival had been easily taken away by librarian Gao. Low sobbing sounds came from the crowd. Some of the old, weak, women, and children did not dare to eat the porridge and dry rations. They planned to save it for when they were really hungry tomorrow. They did not know how they would survive in the future. As for the younger ones, they were extremely angry. Good people don't have good karma. What kind of fucking logic is this? Heavens, don't you have eyes? Corrupt official historian Gao. It's all historian Gao's fault. The public square was like a pot of boiling oil. Waves of angry curses came one after another. They had nowhere to vent their fear of the future and their resentment of being deprived of food. They could only vent some of their anger by shouting. This historian Gao has never done anything good in the city. His son is even worse. It's obvious. This group of cruel officials eat the government's rice, but they are not willing to redress the grievances of the commoners. Instead, they're making us suffer. To put it bluntly, what are our little lives in the eyes of this group of cruel officials? Isn't killing a few or dozens of people just a matter of moving their mouths? Heavens, this is heavens wanting to cut off our path of survival. Angry curses and sorrowful cries mixed together. The entire public square was filled with anger. After the porridge and dry rations were distributed, the commoners did not immediately leave. They still stayed where they were. Those who were familiar with each other gathered together to discuss how to save philanthropist Qian. Percent Qin Yining put down the warm curtains of the carriage and sighed softly. Let's set off for home. Yes. Bing Tang and Ji Yun gave the order. The coachman received the order, and the carriage slowly moved. The wooden wheels rolled across the street, paved with green bricks. The carriage shook rhythmically as it passed through the cracks between the bricks. The lifelike gold-threaded butterfly on Qin Yining's hairpin with an eastern pearl flower sways gently as well. They did not speak on the way back. When they returned to the prince's mansion, Master Zhong rushed over to ask Qin Yining, "Boss, what should we do next?" Qin Yining thought of the refugees in the public square and frowned. How are they now? The crowd in the public square has not dispersed yet. Everyone is angry. They are probably discussing whether to go to historian Gao's house to plead for leniency. Some even said that they would go to the Yamen to plead for the magistrate to release them. Magistrate Yang was in charge of the old capital and was in charge of the surrounding towns. Qin Yining frowned slightly. They are willing to risk their lives as commoners and have the guts to plead for leniency for Zhao Wanjin. This shows how important Zhao Wanjin is to the commoners. That's right. Shopkeeper Zhong also sighed. The weather has been cold, and the old capital has been experiencing disasters for many years. The commoners have already suffered greatly. If it weren't for this offering of porridge, I'm afraid many commoners wouldn't have survived this winter. That is why Zhao Wanjin is revered by them like a living immortal. That is why the commoners do not have high expectations. Qin Yining sighed and shook his head. Although I want the current situation, I cannot bear to see everyone starve or freeze to death. Master Zhong's expression changed as he asked, Wang Fei, do you mean to continue giving out porridge? Yes. Qin Yining nodded. He narrowed his eyes and thought carefully about how to deal with the current situation. Shopkeeper Zhong said anxiously, but wasn't this scene also arranged by the princess consort? Now that we are giving out porridge again, won't the commoners' anger be reduced? That will do us no good. Princess consort, please think twice before you act. Chapter 682. Master Zhong was startled by Qin Yining's question. He furrowed his brow thoughtfully. Qin Yining continued, the time is not right yet. Small fights won't have much of an effect on the Gao person. Once this kind of person recovers, I'm afraid he will retaliate against the common people. If that's the case, it's better to stabilize the common people and wait for the right time to carry out the next step of the plan. Master Zhong thought for a moment, and then slowly nodded in realization. I understand Wang Fei's meaning. I was thinking too simply just now. I didn't consider the consequences of the common people making a ruckus at this time. Qin Yining smiled and comforted Master Zhong. He then sighed and said, natural and man-made disasters. The ones who suffer the most are these common people. If we continue to give out kanji, at least it will increase everyone's chances of survival. Yes, Wang Fei is a benevolent person. No matter if it was when you went bankrupt to save so many people during the drought, or when you use your own money to help Wang Yi save the people during the earthquake, everything you have done has always been done with a clear conscience. I have always admired this. You are too serious. I am a woman, and in this kind of situation, what I can do is limited. The present situation is like this. In the future, there may be many times when I will not be able to act freely. It is already very good to be able to do something for the common people within the limits of my ability. The two discussed some follow-up matters. Master Zhong hurriedly went to arrange the kanji factory with Zhao Yinua. He planned to find a new face to continue giving out kanji. Qin Yining returned to the room to play with the two children for a while. Xian Yun lifted the curtain and entered the room. Seeing Zhao Gu and Han Gu awake, she said in a soft voice, Wang Fei, Jingzhe has returned. Qin Yining immediately stood and handed Han Gu, who was in his arms, to the wet nurse. She had arranged for Jingzhe to secretly investigate the situation in the military camp. Pang Zhao's letter to him contained only good news and not bad news. She was afraid that Pang Zhao was in danger, but did not want her to know. She walked briskly to the main room of the Snow Pear courtyard. Jingzhe had been waiting for a long time with his head bowed. When he saw Qin Yining, he said, Wang Fei, the army seems to be in a state of disunity, but the central part of the camp is heavily guarded. Wang, you must have made arrangements. Our men were afraid of alerting the enemy, so they didn't dare to get too close. As a result, we didn't get much information about Wang Yi. We only saw Wang Yi training his troops. But Deng Minchang's situation is very obvious. This was also within Qin Yining's expectations. If Pang Zhao's commander-in-chief's camp could allow people to gather information at will after so many years of war, wouldn't he have been skinned alive? Then let's talk about Deng Minchang. Yes. Jingzhe clasped his hands and bowed. Then he said in a low voice, Deng Minchang doesn't do anything serious in the army. He is constantly drinking and having beautiful women to serve him. Normally, he is rarely seen training with the soldiers. Wang Yi also doesn't have any intention of strictly disciplining him. This kind of person can become a general. Even though Li Qitian was on the opposite side of them, Qin Yining believed in Li Qitian's intelligence and ability to use people. If Deng Minchong had been this kind of idiot from the beginning, he probably wouldn't have been able to sit in the position of general. Qin Yining unconsciously played with the long hair that fell over his shoulder. His thoughts were all on this unusual situation. But thinking back to what he had seen and heard in the past few days, Qin Yining had a rough idea of what was going on. Even though the sky was high and the emperor was far away, the situation here was no less chaotic than in Beijing. This was the old capital of the Yin dynasty. Not to mention whether the officials were loyal to the Zhou or Dayan, not to mention the distance. The merchants and wealthy families all had their own plans. If Deng Minchong was a tough and principled person like Pang Xiao, whether he was a local official or a tyrant, he was afraid that there would be times when he did things inappropriately. But if a person's temperament was raised the right way, then, when he wanted to do something, he would be able to cater to his liking. What's more, they could even let women talk to him about it. Even if it wasn't for the sake of smoothing out relationships, just having a guard full of flaws would be beneficial to the supporters of the Yin dynasty who were loyal to the Yuqian. Therefore, Qin Yining felt that it wasn't Li Qitian who chose an unreliable person to be the guard. Instead, it was someone who deliberately led the originally outstanding but weak-willed Deng Minchong onto the wrong path. It seems like Wang Ye's situation in the military isn't easy to handle. As the saying goes, if the upper beam is not straight, the lower beam will be crooked. If Deng Minchong is this kind of person, then the soldiers he brought up won't be any better. That's right. Wang Yi might still be busy in the military, Jing just said. Qin Yining asked, are the soldiers still respectful to Wang Yi? Do they still listen to orders and prohibitions? When I went there, it seemed like Wang Yi was handling things with ease. But it's definitely not easy to make all the generals in the military yield. Deng Minchong alone was not enough to represent all the generals in the army. At this time, Qin Yining was extremely glad that he didn't tell Pang Xiao about the mess in his family. Li Qitian didn't have good intentions. If he arranged for Pang Xiao to be in this kind of place, then the situation in the military must have been brewing for a long time. If the general managed things well, then outsiders would see them as glorious, and Li Qitian wouldn't have any reason to blame them. But if they didn't manage things well, then they would have to give up the title of War God Wang Yi. Not to mention Pang Xiao. Even a woman like her would feel embarrassed for Pang Xiao. Wang Fei. Wang Ye's letter has arrived. Xian Yun held a thick envelope with both hands. Qin Yining suddenly stood up in surprise. He took the envelope and looked at Pang Xiao's bold and unrestrained handwriting. Qin Yining smiled from the bottom of his heart. The contents of this letter were the same as the ones he wrote to her in the past. It was all about asking about her well-being, asking about the situation at home and the children's situation. It didn't mention a single word about the difficulties and chaos in the military. He definitely wouldn't write about the information that Jing Zhe found out. Looking at the mushy, I miss you very much, at the bottom of the letter, Qin Yining's face turned red. He sat down at the black lacquered wooden table with a smile. He slowly ground the ink and thought about the contents of the letter. But when she finished writing the letter, she found that what she did was no different from what Pang Xiao did. Pang Xiao didn't tell her about the matters in the military, and she didn't tell Pang Xiao about the troubles around her. The two of them only reported the good news and not the bad news. They both had the unpleasant content and left the happy content. Qin Yining shook his head and laughed. It seemed that Pang Xiao wasn't completely unconcerned about the outside world. He must have heard about the matters in the city. She didn't say anything in the letter. She didn't know if Pang Xiao would be angry if he knew. By the time Pang Xiao received the letter, the sky had already darkened. He brought the letter close to the silk lamp and carefully read it back and forth 3 times. Only then did he chuckle as he folded the letter and kept it close to his body. He then told Huzi, "Take a few clever people and disguise yourselves as commoners. Go into the city and find out if there are any major events happening in the city these days. Chapter 683. Huzi scratched his head and giggled as he said, "Wasn't it Ye's orders?" Something like, "In the future, seeing Wang Fei is like seeing this king. We cannot be disrespectful to Wang Fei and cannot be disloyal. You yourself said that we cannot be disloyal to Wang Fei. How can we reveal Wang Fei's matters to Wang Yi?" "Huh, you still have reason." Pang Xiao laughed as he scolded. But when he thought about it, it did make sense. He had given a death order. Jing Wei, who was protecting Qin Yining, had to treat her as their master. If the brothers said whatever he asked, Pang Xiao might doubt their loyalty. "Forget it. I don't have to pry into the matters around Sister Yi. I just don't feel at ease." Pang Xiao lifted his robe and sat down on the official's hat placed at the head of the tent. When he thought of Qin Yining, he couldn't suppress the smile on his lips. She has a strong personality and is smart. Her analysis and grasp of the political situation is sometimes better than mine. I'm afraid that she will deliberately hide something and not say it. Huzi smiled and said, "Isn't Wang Yi the same? You didn't tell Wang Fei about your matters." "You brat, who are you siding with?" Pang Xiao scolded with a smile. Huzi was not afraid at all. Ever since Wang Yi had Wang Fei in his heart, Wang Yi had become more and more human. He was not as lazy to speak as before and would occasionally chat with him. He was not as depressed as Mr. Zheng, who had returned to his hometown. He did not want Wang Yi to carry the past and pass his days in pain. He hoped that Wang Yi could live like a person and not be bound by those matters all day long. "Wang Yi, I will go and find out the news now." "Go." Pang Xiao used the time when Huzi took people to find out the news to spread out the map of the southeast on the table. He held a silk lamp and looked at it closely. In his mind, he was analyzing the situation in the south and what the Yuchi Yin might do. Gu Shixian was not a good person. He was so old, but his brain still kept up. In addition to his ambition, if it was not handled properly, Dian and Zhou would definitely fight. If he had the Tiger Army, what was there to worry about? But the army in his hands was like a plate of loose sand. If he wanted to train soldiers, it would take time. He was afraid that while he was preparing, Yuchi Yin would catch him off guard. Although Pang Xiao had never said anything, he was well aware of his current situation. The soldiers under his command were not the hardcore army he had trained a long time ago, and he did not have a good reputation in Great Yin. Perhaps the common people were afraid of him or even hated him. Whether it was in the army or among the people, he did not have a firm foothold. He did not have a strong support behind his back. Li Qitian was the person who should support him the most, but he did not know when he would stab him in the back. After thinking about it, it was not so easy to deal with. Unknowingly, for hours had passed, and it was already late at night when everyone was quiet. Huzi brought back the news from the city. The master and servant were silent for a moment. After a quarter of an hour, Huzi sighed with admiration. "Wang Fei is so capable. She is better than other women. Even when I'm not by her side, she is still stirring up the wind and rain. She has mixed up the old." Pang Xiao glanced at Huzi and generously gave him a knock on the head. Was this a compliment? So, it was Duchess Ding who was locked up. That's why these things happened. Pang Xiao was so smart that he understood Qin Yining's intention after thinking about it. He could not help but sigh with emotion for her courage and insight. As you said, Sister Yi is really capable. She is better than other women. Huzi rubbed his forehead and nodded repeatedly. Wasn't that the case? How many women could make all the poor people in the old capital hate historian Gao? The resentment of the people was so great that it almost turned into a substance. Even the magistrate, who had been staying in a corner and keeping a neutral position since he came to the old capital, began to notice it. But Wang Fei is too much. She has already made a big fuss. Isn't it better to let everyone rush to historian Gao's house and force him to let them go? That's too simple and crude. Pang Xiao shook his head. She is worried that the people will be implicated. She is also afraid that the people's anger will not be enough to make historian Gao suffer a big loss. I think she went to Yichue Pavilion to pick up Miss Yu and her sister. Yes, Miss Yu and her sister are now working in Qin's mansion. When Huzi talked about Qin Yining's work, his face was full of admiration and emotion. Pang Xiao temporarily stopped praising Qin Yining. He tapped the table with his index finger and pondered. This might be a good opportunity for him to gain a firm foothold. Send someone to pay close attention to Wang Fei's situation. On the one hand, we can't lose the opportunity. If there are any changes, tell me at any time. On the other hand, the most important thing is to protect Wang Fei's safety. Seeing Pang Zhao's serious expression, Huzi immediately nodded and said seriously, Wang Yi, don't worry. I'll do it right away. The cold night passed. When the sky gradually brightened, even a breath could make a layer of frost hang on one's cheeks. The poor people came out of their shacks and dilapidated temples. They quickly walked to the square, where the porridge factory was located, with their hands in their sleeves and their waists bent. If we run like this, we can warm up a bit. It's all thanks to philanthropist Qian. Otherwise, I wouldn't have the strength to run. I wonder how philanthropist Qian is now. Will he be tortured? It's hard to say. Don't we all know what kind of person historian Gao is? There are many people discussing the same topic along the way. No one was optimistic about the consequences of this matter, so they were all in low spirits. But when they arrived at the porridge factory, they saw that there was only a wooden awning left in the empty square. Inside, there was only a stove made of stone. There was no more thick porridge that gave off the aroma of food and white mist. Everyone's low spirits completely turned into resentment and anger. As expected, the porridge factory was closed. Shopkeeper Qian's family was busy using their connections to save people. They who were in a precarious situation were once again cold and hungry and could lose their lives at any time. The number of people who came increased. At first, everyone was confused and helpless. But after a moment, when everyone remembered who the culprit behind all this was, everyone became angry. It was one thing to hear the news yesterday. It was another thing to actually have no food to eat today. The people were already suffering. Now, their suffering turned into resentment. All of their anger was directed at historian Gao and the local officials who did nothing. What do we do? How do we survive this winter? What kind of world is this? It's so easy for someone to be willing to care about our lives. But the government keeps saying that he's a murderer. It's not the first time the government has done this. I heard that there was a Madame Zheng who wanted to set up a porridge factory and a nursery. However, because the amount of money she gave to librarian Gao was too little, she was arrested and thrown into prison. She hasn't been released yet. No one knows if she's dead or alive. In the crowd, someone casually mentioned this matter. Chapter 684. The winter in the south was cold and damp. Layers of dark clouds hung overhead. The wind and frost cut the thinly clothed commoners, causing them to shrink their necks in the cold. It's almost New Year's Eve. Those wealthy families are gathered together to eat and drink. What about us? I'm afraid we won't survive this winter. One person lamented, causing everyone around him to wipe away their tears. Yesterday, they still had some hope for their future. Even if they lived casually, at least they could eat a mouthful of hot food every day, so they wouldn't starve to death. Moreover, after eating their fill, they seemed to be more resistant to the cold. But now, the porridge stall was empty. Their hope of living had been taken away. It's all librarian Gao's fault. It's all those corrupt officials' fault. They don't treat us as humans at all. Why would they care if we live or die? I still have my mother at home. Without philanthropist Qian's porridge, what will happen to my mother? The helpless commoners wiped away their tears, but the hot tears turned cold in the cold wind. There were also those with bigger tempers who were already beyond angry. Let's go find librarian Gao. Yes, librarian Gao must release the philanthropist who did good deeds. I didn't see him deal with the evildoers, but he's so thick-skinned as to arrest the good people who did good deeds. Does he want us to die? Let's go together. The angry crowd was boiling. Some wanted to go to librarian Gao's residence to ask for clarification, but there were also some who were afraid of librarian Gao and didn't dare to go. Some people shrank back in fear because they knew how powerful librarian Gao was. But everyone else was going to Gao's residence. If they didn't go, what if others got benefits and they didn't get it? However, the crowd only hesitated for a moment because most people were too angry to think. The crowd pushed and shoved in the direction of Librarian Gao's residence. However, at this moment, the sound of horse hooves and wheels rolling came from the direction of the main street from the square. Some commoners nearby turned around and saw a few ox carts. The carts were filled with firewood, food, cooking utensils, and other items. The person following the carts shouted, "We're here to give porridge. Everyone, don't rush. Don't push. Wait a moment." This person's voice wasn't loud, but when someone said that they were going to give out porridge, such a big piece of news still spread far and wide. The people who were closer to them stopped in their tracks and looked at the ox carts doubtfully. They watched as the servants dressed in khaki-colored robes went to the porridge stall and used the stove that had been built to start fire. There were also people who washed the pots and washed the rice. Although it was coarse rice, the sound of the rice being poured into the pot was so beautiful that everyone could not help but swallow their saliva. Everyone's stomach was filled with anger. Most of them had already made up their minds to get Librarian Gao to give them an explanation. However, the boiling anger could not be vented at this moment because of hunger. If they walked away, they didn't know if the person giving out the porridge this time was a daily occurrence. They also didn't know when they would have the chance to eat their fill again. Let's go back. Let's eat first. That's right. We have to survive first before we can think about other things. Everyone comforted each other and went back to the square to wait for the porridge to start. However, the anger in everyone's hearts would not be extinguished just because they had food to eat. They would only become angrier and secretly blame themselves. After all, they were all selfish and could not risk it all for philanthropist Qian. The pot was steaming and the fragrance of the rice gradually spread out. Everyone took their bowls and lined up to get the porridge. However, the porridge this time was much thinner than philanthropist Qian's porridge. When the workers helped to scoop the porridge, a steward explained, "Our family's young master's family has limited resources. They are not as rich as philanthropist Qian's family. If everyone were to eat the thick porridge, the rations would not last long before they ran out. Everyone, please don't be offended. It is important to make do and survive. Please forgive us. Please forgive us." The steward was in his early 30s and looked very honest. Everyone believed what he said. A commoner said, "Your family is doing a good deed to let us survive this winter. How can we be offended? That's right. Your family's young master is a very good person. May I ask his name?" The steward waved his hand and said with a smile, "Young master has instructed that we are not to speak of his name. Everyone, just focus on eating the porridge." The commoners did not ask for the other party's name, but they were still very grateful. However, when they thought of the thick porridge, dry rations, and salted vegetables that philanthropist Qian gave them, and then looked at this bowl of thin porridge, everyone could more or less compare. They did not hate the person who gave the porridge. They hated Jianshi Gao. If Jianshi Gao did not make trouble for no reason, they would still have dry rations to eat. They would not be in such a state where they did not even dare to finish the thin porridge in one go. They were afraid that after eating this meal, no one would come to give them porridge the next day. No one would care about them. Qin Yining sat in the carriage and looked at the commoners in ragged clothes in the square. He felt indescribably sad. He put down the curtain and turned to Master Zhong and said, "Our financial resources are enough. We have to help them survive this winter, no matter what. We cannot stop giving the porridge. We have to persist until spring comes and everything recovers and they can find another way to survive." Master Zhong nodded and said, "Don't worry. Even though there was a disaster this year, our food supplies this porridge factory. If we use it sparingly, we can still survive. Even if we can't make thick porridge, we can still use thin porridge. It's fine as long as everyone can survive." "That's what I mean." Qin Yining nodded and said, "I have always been at ease with Master Zhong's work." Master Zhong cupped his hands and said with a smile, "Wang Fei is too kind. However, I'm also a bit worried. Everyone can eat their fill and wear warm clothes. What if their resentment towards Jianshi Gao disappears bit by bit? What should we do then?" Qin Yining smiled. "Originally, we had the opportunity to eat dry rations, but now we can only eat thin porridge because of Jianshi Gao. Who wouldn't hate him? But whether it is dry rations or thin porridge, they did not get it themselves. That's human nature. Qin Yining said, "It's human nature to be greedy. I'm not belittling anyone. It's just that they already had a chance to get something better, but they were stopped by someone else. People who are angry will only remember this and won't think so much." Master Zhong nodded thoughtfully. He had a new understanding of Qin Yining's ability to analyze people's minds. In the next few days, the porridge factory gave out porridge on time. Even though it was only thin porridge, it was a life-saving food for many of the refugees. Even though everyone could not eat their fill, at least they would not starve to death. They were all grateful to the new great philanthropist. However, everyone's hatred towards Dianshi Gao did not decrease at all, just as Qin Yining had predicted. Chapter 685. Qin Yining hugged Han Gu'er, and Bing Tang hugged Zhao Gu'er. The two of them walked in circles in the warm room with the charcoal brazier burning. Bing Tang coaxed Zhao Gu'er, who was blinking and looking around. She asked in a low voice, "It's almost a new year. I don't know if Wang Yi will be able to come back and reunite with you." Qin Yining smiled helplessly. Wang Yi is tied up with military affairs. There is nothing to be done about it. It's fine if he doesn't come back for the new year. As long as he is safe in the military camp, it doesn't matter even if we are separated for a short time. Wang Fei is really open-minded. If it were anyone else, young couples who rarely spend time together would probably be anxious, afraid that there would be some animosity between the two of them. You, on the other hand, are not anxious at all. There is no use in being anxious. Qin Yining smiled and kissed Han Gu'er in his arms. He coaxed the child into giggling. It was so cute that one's heart would soften. The court is tense right now. How can I ask Wang Yi to take care of outside matters and have enough time to stay at home with me? Also, Wang Yi is not a womanizer. I know that he won't attract women. What is there to be anxious about? Bing Tang couldn't help but smile. Wang Fei and Wang Yi understand each other, trust each other, and love each other. This kind of relationship is enviable. Bing Tang still had not told her that Pang Xiao would rather not have children in order to not let Qin Yining suffer. She had seen the relationship between Qin Yining and Pang Xiao with her own eyes. She had seen them go through trials and hardships together. Even now, they were silently sacrificing for each other. Qin Yining did not want to cause trouble for Pang Xiao. He did not tell Pang Xiao that his grandmother had been arrested. He used schemes to solve it himself. If they could have such a good person, they would not feel pity even if they sacrificed their lives for each other. She coaxed the two children to sleep just as Master Zhong came back from outside. Qin Yining went to the front hall to meet Master Zhong. "How's Lu Dahan doing?" Qin Yining asked with a smile. Lu Dahan was one of the victims that Qin Yining sold the Ning Garden that Pang Xiao gave her to save when the Zhou's army besieged the city and the Yin dynasty suffered from drought and famine. Later, Qin Yining went to the Zhou with his father. People like Lu Dahan and Lu Jiu stayed behind in Dian to work at her field. Lu Dahan and Lu Jiuer had known Qin Yining for a long time. Qin Yining had saved their lives, so they were loyal to Qin Yining. This time, they needed a new face to support the kanji factory. Qin Yining naturally thought of them. After discussing with Mr. Liao and Master Zhong, they decided that when it was inconvenient for Zhao Wanjin and Zhao Yinhua to appear, they would use Lu Dahan. Lu Dahan works seriously, and he is simple and honest. Right now, he has changed his clothes and is only focused on guarding the kanji factory. The victims won't starve. Wang Fei, don't worry. That's good, Qin Yining said with a smile. Wang Fei is doing good deeds that save lives. Lu Dahan was also saved by Wang Fei. Now that you have ordered him to do such a good deed, he is 100% willing. He is also full of praise for Wang Fei and Wang Ye's characters. He keeps saying, "Wang Yi and Wang Fei have done such a good deed, but I can't announce that I did it. I'm really wronged." Qin Yining shook his head and laughed. It's not like it's a good name. Some things will cause trouble if you yell at a meeting. But some people do good deeds for the sake of reputation. Compared to you doing things silently, those who only do it for the sake of reputation are nothing. Those who can do good deeds for the sake of reputation are also good people. If there are more people like that, the pressure on us to give out kanji might be reduced. Qin Yining lowered his voice and asked, "Have Zhao Yinhua and the others found out about the situation in the prison? Do they know where my grandmother and Zhao Wanjin are locked up?" Master Zhong said with a smile, "They should have found out. Liao Zhibing and Zhao Yinhua didn't tell me in detail. I think they will personally tell you when they come back." Qin Yining nodded and chatted with Master Zhong about the farmstead and the kanji. After an hour, Liao Zhibing and Zhao Yinhua also returned. "Wang Fei, we have already found out about the situation. We have seen the old Alliance head cell and also found out where my older brother is." Zhao Yinua's expression was extremely ugly. Without waiting for Qin Yining to ask, she said, "The old Alliance head's life is not in danger, and she wasn't tortured. However, the cell she was locked up in was a wooden cage. She could only curl up inside. There was no beating, no scolding, and no one interrogated her. However, it was very uncomfortable. When our brothers investigated, they found that the hair on the side of the old Alliance head's temples had all turned white. She was completely haggard." Qin Yining's heart clenched when he heard this. His hands tightly clenched his sleeves, and the sweat on his palms soaked his sleeves. She couldn't reveal her worries and uneasiness in front of her subordinates. If she panicked, how could she control them? However, she couldn't suppress the pain and uneasiness in her heart no matter what. "Then what about Hall Leader Zhao? My older brother is still fine. He only suffered some superficial wounds and was whipped. However, my older brother's martial arts skills are high, and he is a dual cultivator. These superficial wounds won't affect him at all. Moreover, he has already caused trouble in prison twice. He killed 2 prisoners who were deliberately looking for trouble and had a strong background. This made Historian Gao so angry that his nose almost became crooked." This matter was the second part of Qin Yining's plan. After Historian Gao incited the dissatisfaction of all the poor people, he used the matter in prison to incite the dissatisfaction of the rich people. Qin Yining had already investigated the 2 prisoners that Zhao Wanjin had killed. Which of the rich and the officials didn't have dirty matters in their manners? There were also many masters who killed people. If they broke the law, as long as they used their connections, they could find a scapegoat to replace them in prison. No matter how much they moved outside, even if they were on death row, they could be released after a year or so. As for the people who replaced their masters in prison, most of them were loyal servants of their masters. Some of them were hoodlums that were bought with large amounts of money. In addition, there were also some rich second generations who originally had a strong background. These people formed a group of mavericks in prison. They weren't really in prison for real. Apart from the fact that their living conditions were slightly worse, it wasn't impossible for them to live a good life in prison after bribing the prison guards. She had told Zhao Wanjin to look for those with strong backgrounds in prison and kill 2 of those who had committed all kinds of evil to establish their authority. Historian Gao was in charge of arresting criminals in the local prison and seemed to be quite popular. If these prisoners with strong backgrounds lost their lives in front of Historian Gao, then the rich people would point their fingers at Historian Gao. Qin Yining said, "It's all thanks to Hall Leader Zhao. However, he was injured because of this. If there's a way, find an opportunity to send some medicine to him. At the very least, don't injure his foundation." At this point, Qin Yining said apologetically, "In the end, it was because of my arrangements that Hall Leader Zhao was injured. I really feel bad about it." "Hey, Alliance Master, what are you saying? We're people of the Jianghu, and we have to be loyal to our friends. Even if we lose our arms and legs in order to save the old Alliance Master, it's worth it. Furthermore, we're all rough people with thick skin and tough bones. A few superficial wounds are nothing. Alliance Master, please don't take it to heart. If you don't take it to heart, then that's because you're loyal to your friends. However, I can't watch Hall Leader Zhao suffer with a clear conscience. I can only think of a way to make it up to him after the plan succeeds." Qin Yining still felt very apologetic. Zhao Yinhua casually waved her hand. Qin Yining was a benevolent Alliance Master. He wouldn't joke around with the lives of his subordinates. Even if they suffered some superficial wounds, she would still feel guilty, let alone when their lives were in danger. It was the Alliance members' fortune to be able to follow such a benevolent Alliance master. On the 29th day of the 12th lunar month, it started snowing in the old capital. Heavy snowflakes fluttered in the air, covering the entire dusty old capital with a layer of snow-white velvet carpet. The collapsed buildings and the cracked, mottled walls appeared even more dusty and dilapidated after the earthquake. At this time, all the servants in the Yang residence were very busy. Tomorrow was New Year's Eve. Although the residence had been completely cleaned on the day of the Little New Year, the snow that fell to the ground today was half melted. When people stepped on it, it would turn into a puddle of mud. Magistrate Yang liked cleanliness. If they offended him, they wouldn't be able to have a good New Year. When Librarian Gao was led into the residence by a servant, he saw that the courtyard was full of busy servants. He walked along the bluestone brick path to the study in the outer courtyard. A servant went in to report. Not long after, he came out and said, "Librarian Gao, the magistrate invites you in." Chapter 686. Magistrate Yang looked down at a book of poems as if he didn't see the person standing in front of him. His contemptuous attitude made Gao Gao very unhappy. But Gao Gao didn't have the courage to get angry at this time. He was all thinking about why his superior was unhappy. No matter how much he thought about it, he still couldn't figure it out. Magistrate Yang, I, Gao Wenyao, pay my respects to you. After waiting for half an hour, Gao Wenyao couldn't help but salute again. Magistrate Yang flipped through a page of the book, cast a cold, sidelong glance at Librarian Gao, and asked slowly, "Do you know why I asked you to come here?" "Yes, I don't know." "You don't know?" Magistrate Yang threw the book of poems in his hand on the table. The pen holder fell on the table with a bang. "Please don't be angry." Gao Wenyao hurriedly saluted. Magistrate Yang was a newly promoted official after Great Zhou annexed Great Yan. He was originally an official of Great Zhou, while Grand Historian Gao was an old man from the old capital. Both of them were not familiar with each other, and as Magistrate Yang had always been an inconspicuous person, he had always been gentle and courteous when dealing with people. In front of Librarian Gao, he had never lost his temper like this before. Gao Wenyao clenched his fists and his muscles twitched. Magistrate Yang's face was gloomy and his eyes were full of resentment. He stood up angrily and pointed his trembling finger at Gao Wenyao. After a long time, he suppressed the reprimand that was about to come out of his mouth and said in a low voice, "Gao Wenyao, do you think I don't know what you're doing secretly?" Gao Wenyao shivered and lowered his head even more. Magistrate Yang walked around the table and slowly walked to Gao Wenyao. From Gao Wenyao's angle, he could only see the boots on Magistrate Yang's feet. "I don't care who you contact in private, who you ask for, and who you do things for. I don't want to get involved. But you have to have a sense of propriety when you do things. You have to know who you are working for and to what extent. I won't report it to the Imperial Court, and I don't want to help anyone. But don't push your luck. What you're doing now has seriously affected the public order under my jurisdiction." Dianshi Gao finally understood. It seemed that Magistrate Yang knew that he was secretly loyal to Lord Jinan. He was a Dayan to begin with, and used to be an official of the Yan dynasty. While the county king of Yan was now the king of Jinan, he still had the blood of the royal family running through his veins. Warden Gao had been ordered by the king of Jinan to capture Madame Zheng. He just didn't expect that something like that would happen to his son. Now he was lying at home half dead, crying all day long. He also felt that regardless of whether it was Qian Gui kicking and injuring his beloved son, causing him to go and capture him and inciting public anger, or killing 2 death row prisoners in prison and causing the wealthy families to come and put pressure on Magistrate Yang, it was all premeditated. That old woman had been locked up for quite some time and had not contacted the outside world. However, Dianshi Gao could not convince himself that it was just a coincidence. Now that he heard Magistrate Yang's words, Librarian Gao's mind became clear. It turned out that Magistrate Yang also felt that these things had something to do with him imprisoning Madame Zheng. What was Madame Zheng's background? Where did she get such power from? However, how could Librarian Gao dare to admit it, even though he thought so? In front of Magistrate Yang, an official of the Zhou, if he admitted that he had followed the orders of the Yuchi-Yin, wouldn't it be the same as participating in some unspeakable activities? Would he still want his head in the future? Sir, did you misunderstand something? I work for the imperial court wholeheartedly and dare not have any selfish motives. Why would I work for others? Magistrate Yang sneered. A straightforward person doesn't resort to insinuations. Do you want me to make everything clear? Librarian Gao's heart thumped. Magistrate Yang's tone turned gentle. Fine, you should know what I mean. There's no need to say more. Just deal with the aftermath as soon as possible and don't affect me. I believe that with Librarian Gao's ability, it will be a piece of cake for you to deal with the current situation. Sweat appeared on Librarian Gao's forehead. He nodded and said, Yes, I will do my best to deal with it as soon as possible. Magistrate Yang nodded and waved his hand, indicating that Librarian Gao could leave. He then returned to his previous position to look at the poetry collection. Librarian Gao bowed his head and retreated. Only when he left the study did he let out a sigh of relief. He was led out of the Yang estate by his servant. When he exited the corner gate, a gust of cold wind blew in his face. Only then did Dianshi Gao realize that his entire body was covered in sweat. The sweat on his forehead was dried by the cold wind, causing him to shiver from the cold. He hurriedly withdrew his sleeves and shrunk his neck as he quickly left. However, he had only taken 5 or 6 steps when he heard the sound of horse hooves and the rolling of wheels behind him. Librarian Gao curiously looked back and saw 2 carriages stop in front of the Yang estate. These 2 carriages were ordinary oil wall carriages. The carriages looked neither new nor old, and there was nothing special about them. However, the horses pulling the carriages were actually Fergana horses with shiny fur. What surprised him even more was the 8 tall and strong men following beside the carriages. The 8 men were all strong and sturdy, and their movements were light and graceful. Librarian Gao had also practiced martial arts before. With one look, he could tell that these people were experts in both internal and external martial arts. Even if there were 10 of him, he would not be able to win against one of them. These bodyguards were even more valuable than Fergana horses. What kind of family would be able to afford such bodyguards? Librarian Gao stood in the corner and curiously craned his neck. He saw a bodyguard knock on the door, and the doorman quickly entered the estate. Not long after, he saw Magistrate Yang and a few female figures flash past the corner gate. Following that, the main gate of the Yang estate actually opened. One had to know that the main gate would not be opened under normal circumstances. Librarian Gao was even more curious. He hid himself in the corner and stared at the carriage intently. He saw the warm curtains of the carriage being lifted by a white hand, and a woman wearing a green cloak peeked out from inside. That woman was 16 years old, and her hair was combed into 2 rings. She wore a green dress and was dressed like a maid. Her appearance was indescribably beautiful, and she stood there charmingly, like a lotus blooming in summer. Even Librarian Gao, who had seen many beauties, could not help but suck in a breath of cold air when he saw that beautiful maid. That pretty maid lifted the warm curtains and leaned forward to support him. Following that, he saw a tall young master dressed in a white robe and a sable fur cloak get out of the carriage. When he saw the young master's appearance, Librarian Gao even forgot to breathe. He had only thought that pretty maid was a peerless beauty, but who would have thought that this young master's appearance was 100 times better than that maid's? Taking a closer look at the young master's walking posture and figure, how was this a young master? It was clearly a tall and handsome woman dressed in men's clothing. Librarian Gao had never seen such a beauty before, and he could not help but be stunned. Not only Librarian Gao, but even Magistrate Yang, who led his family to the door to welcome them, was also stunned at this time. The woman walked up to Magistrate Yang and saluted him in a manner that was neither servile nor overbearing. She was graceful and elegant. She didn't look feminine in men's clothes, but she didn't look manly or vulgar at all. Her voice sounded noble and self-restrained, and it was very appropriate to reveal a bit of friendliness. "Uncle, nice to meet you." Magistrate Yang finally came back to his senses, coughed, and returned to his normal appearance. He stretched out his hand to support her. "Miss Chiu, please don't be so polite. Uncle is too polite. Just call me Fei Shan." Chiu Fei Shan turned to look at the magistrate's wife behind Magistrate Yang. "Aunt, nice to meet you." The magistrate's wife was still a little confused, and there was some suspicion and inquiry on her plump round face. She politely squeezed out a smile and said, "Don't be so polite. It's cold outside. Let's talk inside the mansion." "Exactly." Magistrate Yang nodded. Magistrate Yang and the magistrate's wife led Chiu Fei Shan into the mansion first. The doorman was busy removing the threshold, and the servants and guards drove the carriage into the Yang mansion from the front door, and then the gate was closed with a bang, completely blocking Librarian Gao's sight. Chapter 687. Your Highness, Librarian Gao went to visit Magistrate Yang today. Our people investigated carefully and found that it was Magistrate Yang who sent someone to look for Librarian Gao. Librarian Gao didn't take the initiative to visit him. Jingzhe had arranged for someone to secretly observe Librarian Gao. Now that he received the news, he immediately came to report. Qin Yining frowned slightly, pursed his lips, and muttered, "Magistrate Yang has been staying at home all this time. It seems that he doesn't want to interact with people, and he doesn't want to get involved in the chaotic situation in the old capital. Librarian Gao has angered the public and is now involved in trouble. If Magistrate Yang went to look for him at this time, it would go against his principles." "Your Highness, you're right. Magistrate Yang has always been neutral. When Wang Yi came, he didn't come out to welcome him. As for Jinan Wang, Magistrate Yang has never shown any intention of getting close to him." Qin Yining stood up and thought for a moment, then felt relieved. The city looks peaceful now, but in fact, the people and nobles are very dissatisfied with Librarian Gao. Since Magistrate Yang is a person who avoids disputes, he definitely doesn't want to see his subordinates cause trouble for him. He probably asked Librarian Gao to go over to tell him what to do next. "That's right." Jingzhe nodded and said mockingly, "Librarian Gao kidnapped the old madam, but he didn't expect to get himself into trouble. Not only did his son get into trouble, but he also angered the public. I don't know if he regrets taking the old madam away now that he thinks about it." Qin Yining shook his head and laughed. He was just following orders. Moreover, the person in charge of this matter must be someone who wants the South to be at odds with each other. To be more certain, this matter was most likely ordered by Jinan Wang. Librarian Gao thought that he was on the right side, but he made the wrong decision. It would be a lie to say that he doesn't regret it. That's right. If I were him, I would have some self-awareness and wouldn't cause trouble blindly. Not only did he bring bad luck to himself, but he also made the people around him suffer. Jingzhe's mockery was even more obvious. Although he was a silver mask spy, he didn't like the Dian royal family at all. He despised incapable rulers and didn't have a good impression of cowardly rulers. Now, it was clear whether the Yuchi Yin wanted to restore the Dian for their own dream of becoming the emperor or for the welfare of the common people. Ever since Dian submitted to the Zhou did not treat the people of Yin differently. Instead, their lives were more stable. It was rare for them to have such stability. If he was an ordinary person, he would definitely hope that the people in power would stop messing around. After thinking for a while, Jingzhe said, "There's one more thing. Our men saw a special guest in front of the Yang residence." "Special?" "That's right. Magistrate Yang and his family came out to welcome them personally and even opened the main door to let them in." Qin Yining was astonished. Normally, the main door of a wealthy family would not be opened. What's more, Magistrate Yang and his family opened the main door to welcome them personally. In family Qin, when the Yuchi Yin visited the Qin residence when he was still the crown prince, their family had welcomed him in such a grand manner. Did you see what kind of guest it was? Yes. They said that it was a beautiful woman dressed in men's clothes. Because they were far away and the other party's voice was not loud, they only heard the woman call Magistrate Yang uncle. Qin Yining nodded slowly. It's almost the new year. Relatives will come to visit. What was strange was Magistrate Yang's grand attitude. In today's world, Women's status was lower than men's. With Magistrate Yang's status, if this woman didn't have a noble or special status, why would he open the main door to welcome her with his family? Qin Yining didn't believe that they were uncle and niece. But now that she had something important to do, she didn't care about Magistrate Yang's private affairs. In the afternoon, Master Zhong, Zhao Yinhua, and Lu Dehan all came back. Princess Consort, will we start the operation tomorrow? Let's start tomorrow, Qin Yining said with some guilt. Tomorrow is the new year. It's a bit cruel to do that, but it's easier to succeed during the new year. Master Zhong said disapprovingly, Princess Consort, you're too kind. You've already done your best to help everyone get through this harsh winter. You don't owe them anything, and you don't have the obligation to feed them. You won't harm their lives. They won't die from starvation for a day. You can continue to give them porridge after rescuing the old madam. How can your kindness to them not offset their hunger for a day? Even so, I still feel a bit guilty. After all, although I sincerely helped them, I also took advantage of their anger. Master Zhong smiled and shook his head. Qin Yining was still young after all. He was too soft-hearted. Since they had decided on a plan, everyone went to prepare. The next day, when the commoners went to the square to get their porridge, there was no steaming pot under the porridge stall. They also couldn't smell the rich aroma of rice. Everything was fine yesterday. Philanthropist Lu even brought the shopkeeper to give us porridge. Why isn't he here today? Could it be that Philanthropist Lu went home to celebrate the new year? No, Philanthropist Lu wouldn't abandon us. He said yesterday that he would give us porridge as usual today. Could it be that he was caught by Historian Gao? Historian Gao specializes in catching good people who do good deeds. It was not known who said this, but very quickly, the news of Grand Historian Gao arresting the great philanthropist Lu, who had once again given the people hope for survival, spread from 1 to 10 to 10 to 100. In the end, the rumors became conclusive. Librarian Gao has gone too far. Previously, there was an old madam who wanted to do good deeds, but because she didn't give him enough money, she was thrown into prison. Then, he caught philanthropist Qian in front of us. Now, he's caught philanthropist Lu. He's deliberately trying to destroy us. Fuck that Historian Gao. He doesn't care if he eats well and raises a son who chases chickens and dogs. Instead, he wants to bully us poor people. He doesn't even give us a bowl of porridge to eat. He's forcing us to die in front of his house. Die? What die? If I want to die, I'll beat that bastard to death first. A few of the refugees couldn't take it anymore and started cursing. Everyone's anger was raised another level by those vulgar words. They had been suppressing their anger for a long time. When they saw philanthropist Qian being beaten and caught, they became cowards in order to eat their fill. Their hearts were already filled with guilt. Now that they heard that philanthropist Lu was also caught, where are they going to find another good person to let them eat and drink for free? Since Historian Gao doesn't want to give us a way out, we'd rather drag him down with us. Brothers, let's go raid his house and save all the good people who did good deeds. Yes, let Historian Gao release all the good people. If they save the good people, they would have food to eat and hope to live. With so many people, they weren't afraid that Historian Gao wouldn't agree. The starving refugees roared angrily and squeezed in the direction of the Gao residence. Because the porridge was given out for a long time, the refugees who heard the news from the old capital all came over. Now, the group of refugees was no longer the initial 100 people, but a few thousand people. Other than the elderly, women, and children who didn't have any strong men in their families. Those who were queuing in the cold to receive the porridge and thin clothes were mostly men and their families. Even if their stomachs were stuffed with hunger and their flesh was eaten away, making them as thin as reeds, the dignity and anger that belonged to men in their hearts finally exploded under the pressure. Therefore, when this group of nearly 1,000 refugees, more than half of whom were men, rushed to the front of the Gao residence, the gatekeeper was so scared that he bolted the door shut. Chapter 688. Even if the gatekeeper didn't say anything, the people in the residence all came out to take a look. The angry roars of nearly 1,000 people were too shocking. The refugees were so angry that they lost their minds. The Gao residence's doors were tightly shut, and they didn't even dare to fart. This gave everyone a lot of confidence and courage. The Gao residence was only one street away from a yamen, and the old capital's yamen was just a corner away. The uproar frightened the officials at the yamen's entrance, and they all hurriedly retreated back into the yamen and closed the door. When the commoners saw that none of the ferocious-looking officials dared to step forward, their confidence instantly increased. The men took the lead in cursing loudly. They picked up whatever they could get their hands on, such as rocks, mud, horse dung, etc., and threw it with all their might at the door of Historian Gao's house. Let philanthropist Qian out. Gao, you'll die a horrible death. Why don't you have any descendants? Let go of all the good people who did good things. The ones closest to the door were the happiest. Every time they hit the door would shake and leave a large piece of dirt. In the blink of an eye, the Gao residence's door, which had been decorated with red lanterns and couplets for the new year, was covered in dirt. It looked terrible. What was even more frightening was the majestic aura of the angry refugees. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that if the Yin dynasty army that resisted Zhou had this kind of imposing manner, the Pang Shao would have to put in a lot of effort to break in. What's going on? What's going on outside? In the Gao residence, Gao Jinsher screamed and grabbed Gao Dinsher's sleeve. Her palms were covered in cold sweat in her panic, and her sharp nails dug into Gao Dinsher's arm. Gao Dinsher pushed his wife away and quickly walked to the porch, listening to the roars outside. Although the shouting was chaotic, people were always very sensitive to their own names. They had a feeling. The people outside were all pointing at him and cursing. The level of vulgarity was unprecedented. Throughout his life, Gao Jinsher had never been cursed at like this, let alone when so many people were shouting at him at the same time. That earth-shattering sound shocked everyone in the area and caused them to close their doors. A mass uprising was about to happen. Even if Librarian Gao had guts as big as the sky, he was now completely panicking. No matter who it was, being cursed and scolded by thousands of people at the same time, they would not be able to calm down. Master, what should we do? What should we do? Gao Jinsher also understood what was going on. Her voice was shrill, and she grabbed Librarian Gao's sleeve again in fear. How could Historian Gao care about the Jin family at this time? She pushed him away forcefully and quickly ran towards the outer courtyard. As she ran, she ordered the servants to guard the courtyard. Get your weapons and block the front and back doors. Don't even let the dogs hole go. Don't let those beggars break in. Once those people barge in from top to bottom, including all of you, don't even think about living. The servants and guards who had long been scared to death forced themselves not to look like cowards. Their legs were weak as they scrambled to grab weapons, axes, door bolts, and even rushed into the kitchen to grab rolling pins. Gao Jinsher was so scared that she took a few steps back and hid in the room. She ordered the maids and older female servants around her to quickly carry the low cabinet to block the door. Quick, quick, quick! Don't let those stinky beggars barge in. But madam, master is still outside. Oh, I can't care so much. Gao Jinsher was shocked and scared. She retreated to the side of the bed and hugged the sleeping young Master Gao. She couldn't help cursing. That bastard didn't let us live a good life. He caused my son to lose his virginity. Now he's invited a group of thugs to our house. If those people break in, we women will lose our chastity. The maids and older female servants were so scared that they almost burst into tears. Not only did they block the doors and windows, but they also grabbed the scissors and the needle and thread dustpan. Those who didn't grab the scissors went to look for the hairpin in Gao Jinsher's dowry. They held the hairpin like they were holding a dagger and pressed their ears to the window to listen to the roars outside that were getting louder and louder. A young girl was so scared that her legs became weak. She fell to the ground and covered her mouth to suppress her tears. Although the women and children of the Gao family were like this, Historian Gao recovered from his panic and became angry. After all, he had been domineering for many years. As a local tyrant, how could he be afraid of a group of poor beggars? In the past, he was the one who killed people. It wasn't the turn of this group of bastards to kill him. Historian Gao put on his official robes and carried his saber. He called the servants to protect the courtyard and angrily rushed to the front door. Outside the door, there was a deafening roar of anger. It was difficult for anyone not to be afraid of the momentum that was like a tsunami. Historian Gao suppressed the fear that was spreading in his heart. He held the hilt of his saber and ordered in a deep voice, "Open the door." "Master, we can't do that. Those people outside are a group of savages. If we open the door and let them break in, the residents will be finished." "Yes, master. Let's run." "Run where?" Historian Gao angrily rebuked the servant who came up with the bad idea and sneered. "Thousands of people can't break through a wooden door. If we only close the door, do you think they won't break in? The one surnamed Gao, can eat anything, but I won't suffer a loss. Open the door. Let me go and meet that stinking beggar." The servants didn't dare to disobey Historian Gao's orders. His hand was tightly gripping the hilt of his saber. It was as if he could swing his saber at them at any time. In front of them was Historian Gao, and outside the door was a group of angry mobs. They didn't know which one to hide from first. Just as the crowd was hesitating, Historian Gao had already angrily pushed aside the people blocking the way. He unlatched the door and personally opened the door. Holding his saber, he walked out in large strides. Angrily staring at the mobs in front of him, Historian Gao's eyes were about to split open. He gritted his teeth and loudly shouted, "Still not quiet down. Do you want to rebel? Do you want to die?" The refugees were stunned when they were reprimanded, and some of their voices grew weaker. After all, since ancient times, civilians didn't fight with officials. These commoners were used to being bullied. With their lowly status, they really didn't have the experience of fighting with someone like Historian Gao. As a result, many of the refugees on the spot were stunned, and their shouts weakened. Historian Gao sneered and walked forward in large strides. He pointed his saber at the crowd and said, "Do you want to rebel? Hurry up and disperse. Otherwise, this official will call the army to suppress you. Do you know Prince Zhongshuan? You don't know who Prince Zhongshuan is, but you should at least know the Tiger Army's commander-in-chief, Pang Zhishi." Prince Zhongshuan was the commander-in-chief of the Tiger Army. Now, Wang Yi is stationed in the army's barracks. If you continue to cause trouble, I will ask Wang Yi to flatten you mob. This was the same as pouring a bucket of cold water on the crowd. Pang Xiao had a fierce reputation. When he trampled the Dian, he besieged the capital. In the end, he beat the Yin dynasty's emperor until he had no choice but to submit a letter of surrender. He had completely destroyed the Dian dynasty's rule. He was a figure that made the Dian commoners tremble in fear. Chapter 689. At the corner of the street, Qin Yining was wearing a dark blue embroidered cloak and a guanyin hood of the same color. Half of her face was hidden in the shadows. Seeing that librarian Gao was using Pang Zhao's identity to scare people, she couldn't help but sneer. Perhaps only such a shameless person would be able to teach scum like young Master Gao. Qin Yining was able to keep her cool, but the people around her couldn't take it anymore. They all gritted their teeth and cursed librarian Gao along with the refugees. The citizens who had been shocked by librarian Gao's mention of Pang Xiao finally regained their senses and cursed again. This time, the ones who dared to curse were the hot-tempered and righteous men. "You corrupt official, let out philanthropist Qian and philanthropist Liu. Let out the old madam who has done good things before. You don't care about our lives, but you don't let others care about our lives. What kind of justice is this? Your family is decorated with lanterns and colored banners, eating and drinking well. Have you ever thought that our family members might starve or freeze to death? Let the good people come out." Someone took the lead and shouted, attracting everyone's attention. They had come for the matter of food. Cursing a librarian Gao wouldn't help them achieve their goal. They had to make demands and force librarian Gao to agree to them. The citizens were all shouting loudly. Even those cowardly refugees who had been scared stiff earlier were all in agreement, asking librarian Gao to let them out. Nearly 1,000 people were expressing their opinions, and most of them were shouting angrily. This kind of quarrel was something that Qin Yining had never seen before. Beside Qin Yining, Jingzhe and Master Zhong were silent. Master Zhong looked at Librarian Gao, whose face had turned green from being shouted at by so many citizens. He couldn't help but shake his head and say in a low voice, "No wonder there's a saying that water can carry a boat, but it can also capsize a boat. There are only 1,000 people here, but there's already such a shocking scene. What if all the citizens of the world are dissatisfied? They don't even have to do anything. Just one sentence from each person is enough to shock everyone to death." Qin Yining shook his head. "That's the theory, but the premise is that all the citizens of the world have a common goal. What can make everyone have a common goal? Naturally, it's for mutual benefit." He raised his hand slightly, and the mink fur collar swayed in the wind, making the black mink fur look shiny and smooth. "If we didn't come here for the same purpose today, we wouldn't be able to work together like this. Everyone has their own little plans." This was not to belittle the refugees' sense of brotherhood and justice, but the simplest and most obvious human nature. Humans were selfish, and they all wanted to protect themselves. If it did not involve something closely related to their own survival, how could they stand up for others and almost lose their own lives? Master Zhong was stunned. Then he shook his head and said with a bitter smile, "Princess Consort is right. If it wasn't for Wang Fei's ingenious plan to let everything happen at the best time, then the situation wouldn't be as oppressive as it is now. If Qin Yining hadn't acted at the right time, just based on the angry citizens, they wouldn't have been as angry as they were now, and wouldn't have gathered in one place. Maybe when they saw the signs of something about to happen, they would have shrunk their necks and run away. Therefore, the thousands of people gathered in one place for the same purpose. This scene made Master Zhong, Jingzhe, and the others feel great admiration. Wang Fei had always been this intelligent. She could always point out what the next step should be at the most crucial moment. She could always find the essence of the matter in the tangled and complicated situation and think of better ways to solve all problems. As he spoke, Historian Gao's quarrel with the people became fiercer and fiercer, and he even pulled out his sword. The refugees were so frightened by Historian Gao's action that they fell silent for a moment. Yet the leader of the refugees was clearly provoked. Ignoring Historian Gao's sword pointing at him, he said loudly, "We didn't come here to harm unrelated people. We aren't you. We aren't as despicable as you to kill the innocent. That's right, we just want you to let the innocent people go. Not only are you not willing, you are pointing your sword at us. Could it be that whoever has a sword can be unreasonable? Do you believe that I won't cut you down first?" Historian Gao fiercely waved the sword in his hand. The threatened refugee wasn't someone to be trifled with. He immediately stretched out his neck and said, "Go ahead, if you kill me, there will naturally be people who will take revenge for me. In any case, I won't be able to live. Even if I don't get killed here, I will starve and freeze to death the next day. If I die now, it will be better." The refugees at the back were furious when they heard this. They all pointed at Historian Gao and shouted, "You dare!" Even though everyone's voices were chaotic, when everyone glared at him and threatened him, even Historian Gao felt some fear in his heart. When he said he would kill people, it was just to scare these people. It would be best if he could scare them away. He didn't expect that the refugees, who were usually as quiet and obedient as rabbits, who wouldn't even have the guts to say no, even if he were to slap them. Instead, the cowardly commoners who would always run away with their tails between their legs were not even afraid of death today. If he really did touch anyone, the next thing that would be broken through would be his home. His wife, children, and several beautiful concubines would all be attacked by the refugees. His family's wealth would also be robbed clean. The consequences would be unimaginable. Just as the refugees were incessantly agitated and the women and children in the residence were trembling like leaves in a storm, Historian Gao suddenly thought of a way to deal with it. This matter wasn't my decision to begin with. I am just a historian, and I'm only following orders. None of this was my idea. Even if you all block my door, it's useless. The refugees were stunned when they heard this. For a moment, they didn't know what to say. Historian Gao saw that the scene had quieted down, and the situation seemed to have eased. He let out a sigh of relief. It seemed that he had found the right method. Historian Gao continued in a loud voice. I usually do things for the sake of the imperial court. Although I am strict, I do things impartially. I don't arrest people because I like it, but because I arrest people who are truly guilty. The people I arrest are all people who have violated the laws of the Zhou. Don't tell me that every person who impartially enforces the law has to face your crimes. Everyone looked at each other in dismay. Qin Yining narrowed his eyes and laughed in a low voice. It seems that we have underestimated him. When he tries to quibble, his words are clear and logical. Master Zhong and Jingzha's faces were full of contempt. They looked at each other, and Jingzha immediately signaled to someone in the crowd with his eyes. We don't believe you. You are clearly trying to shirk your responsibility. You see that there are so many of us, so you are afraid. You want to push the blame to others and fool us? There is no way. Don't you mean that someone ordered you to do this, and that this matter was done by an official with a higher rank than you? Ask him to come out. We want to confront that official and ask him why he is arresting people. The refugees, who couldn't even read a single word, nodded their heads in agreement. Everyone chimed in. That's right. Ask your official to come out. We want to ask him. Historian Gao's face darkened. He didn't expect this group of people to be so difficult to fool. Ask for his superior? Could it be that he could invite Magistrate Yang over? Historian Gao stood rooted to the ground like a log and refused to say a single word. Someone took the lead and shouted, You're obviously trying to shirk responsibility and fool us. Release philanthropist Qian. Release philanthropist Qian who has done good deeds. This person shouted angrily while waving his fists. Such a rallying action ignited everyone's heroic spirit, and they all shouted along. The Gao family's gate, which had only been quiet for a moment, was once again thrown into chaos. The refugees were even crowding in Historian Gao's direction. There were even a few angry refugees who stood at the back and couldn't reach Historian Gao. They all turned and rushed towards a nearby yamen. When the commotion started, the yamen's gate was already tightly shut. Only a few bailiffs had their ears pressed against the gate to listen in on the outside. At this moment, not only were the refugees not appeased, they even rushed straight towards the prefectural magistrate's office. All the bailiffs were in a panic, cursing Librarian Gao for throwing all the blame on them. They hurriedly went to find someone to block the entrance, fearing that the entrance would be breached by the refugees. The 1,000 or so refugees were divided into two groups. One group was cursing at Historian Gao, while the other group was rushing to break through the yamen's gate. The crowd's angry roars pierced through the clouds. Not to mention what the people in the Gao family would think if they heard this. Just Qin Yining, who was standing at the corner of the street, was deeply shocked by the scene. Her heart was beating wildly with the crowd. Everything was going according to Qin Yining's plan, but in reality, she wasn't happy at all. Instead, she was worried for these poor people. She was afraid that there would be casualties. If someone lost their life because of this, then it would be her fault. She would feel guilty. At this moment, the sound of hurried horse hooves suddenly came from the street corner. One of the bailiffs rushed over at top speed and shouted at Historian Gao from afar, Magistrate Yang has ordered you to release Qian Gui immediately. At this time, Librarian Gao held his blade horizontally, and the blade was about to touch the commoners' bodies. Hearing this sudden roar, not only the commoners, but even Librarian Gao himself was stunned. The bright blade stopped in its place, emitting a cold light. Historian Gao's eyes were about to pop out of their sockets as he looked at the bailiffs on the horse. The commoners also turned their heads and looked at the person who had come to pass on the message. That person felt uncomfortable from being looked at, and he shouted, Gao Wenyao, are you going to openly defy an order? The magistrate is a kind and upright person. He is a good official who thinks for the people. But you, for your own selfish desires, you are slandering the magistrate. You are slandering an official of the imperial court. The magistrate will definitely report this to his superior. You, when did I slander the magistrate? You, why aren't you going to release him? Are you still trying to stall for time? Historian Gao's face was completely ruined by the reprimand, but he couldn't care less about it now. He could only appease the people around Magistrate Yang and get through this difficult situation. He would go back and ask for forgiveness from the magistrate. Chapter 690. The commoners immediately cheered. This was the first time that poor commoners like them had won against a noble official. Their lowly status had always been trampled into the mud by people like Librarian Gao. In the past, they didn't even dare to raise their heads to speak in front of Librarian Gao, wishing that they could curl up into a small ball to avoid trouble. However, today, the anger of thousands of them had caused even a domineering person like Librarian Gao to retreat, and even the prefectural magistrate to release them. It turned out that as long as these dust-like people were united, they could also find their dignity in this ruthless world and achieve their goals. The commoners cheered and jumped for joy, as if the other party's agreement to hand over Qiangui was already an important milestone. Seeing this group of people jumping for joy, Librarian Gao couldn't help but heave a sigh of relief. As for the servants in the Gao residence, they heard the curses outside rise and fall, before finally turning into cheers. They also secretly heaved a sigh of relief. If this group of rioters were allowed to break into the Gao residence, they probably wouldn't be able to survive. Just as the crowd was cheering, someone in the crowd suddenly said, "That's not right, Librarian Gao. We want you to release all the kind-hearted people. Didn't you capture philanthropist Liu? Did you capture a madam who was doing good deeds just because she didn't give you enough money?" Librarian Gao was originally smiling smugly, but his smile froze when he heard this. It wasn't that he hadn't thought of this. It was just that he had been too confident and was blinded. Previously, he didn't pay attention to this kind-hearted madam that the crowd was talking about. Even when Prefectural Magistrate Yang found him and reprimanded him, Librarian Gao didn't take it seriously. At least, he didn't have a clear understanding of his own actions. But now, looking at the crowd gathered in front of his residence and the scene that almost scared him out of his wits, he suddenly realized that perhaps today's riot wasn't purely because he had captured Qiangui to avenge his son. That madam might be the real culprit behind all this. Librarian Gao's face was dark as he realized that he had gotten himself into a huge mess. Perhaps even if he released that madam, if someone wanted to avenge her, he wouldn't have a good time either. Fine beads of sweat began to form on Historian Gao's forehead. He didn't know who that madam was. He wasn't even sure if it was the Jinnan king himself who ordered him to do this. This was because in his lifetime, he had done this kind of thing countless times, where he casually captured people and sold them a favor. This time, after receiving a large sum of money and a request, he also intended to get closer to him. This way, he could kill two birds with one stone. Naturally, Librarian Gao agreed without hesitation. Now that he heard more and more people stop cheering and began to force him to release the madam who did good deeds and some philanthropist Liu, Librarian Gao was really awakened. "I didn't catch any philanthropist Liu." Librarian Gao's face turned red as he raised his voice. "That philanthropist Liu refused to come out. Could it be that he's scared of you poor bastards? I'm not related to you, and I don't have to do this kind of thing. It's fine if you eat it once or twice, but why are you addicted to it? Don't tell me that after being kind enough to give you a bowl of porridge and save your lives, you have to be fed for the rest of your lives. Why was it that when Qiangui was captured, I didn't see you come to save him so angrily?" The more Librarian Gao scolded, the angrier he became. In his eyes, these people were all crude and useless trash. They could even get addicted to eating charity. As long as someone gave them something to eat, they wouldn't want to work. Those refugees who were a bit closer heard Librarian Gao's words, and had their current situation pointed out, felt a bit embarrassed. It was because they had indeed become dependent on the philanthropist. Moreover, when philanthropist Qian was captured in front of them, in order to protect themselves and continue to have food to eat, they didn't stand up for philanthropist Qian. Instead, they chose to stay and eat the porridge given by philanthropist Liu. Now, they angrily came to settle accounts with Librarian Gao because someone said that philanthropist Liu had also been captured. What if another person came to give porridge at this time? There were many refugees who would choose to continue eating porridge. They wouldn't dare to gather in front of Librarian Gao's house and force Librarian Gao to release the people. Many of the refugees lowered their heads in shame. Librarian Gao's words were right. They were indeed selfish to the extreme. The two philanthropists gave them food and used their own money, but what about them? They didn't give the two philanthropists the same amount in return. Qin Yining listened to Librarian Gao's words from behind the crowd and couldn't help but sigh with admiration at Librarian Gao's eloquence. It seemed that he did have some skills to be able to become a Librarian Gao. Qin Yining looked at Jingzhe. Jingzhe immediately understood and looked at another part of the crowd. At this time, someone loudly scolded, "Stop twisting words and forcing logic. We refugees don't have food to eat, but as an official, you don't care? Do we want to have no food to eat? Do we want to have no home to return to? We are all down-to-earth farmers, not people who eat for free. But because of natural disasters and man-made disasters, we lost our homes and the land we relied on to survive. We naturally have to repay the kindness of philanthropist Liu and philanthropist Qian. But whether we repay the kindness or not, what does it have to do with you, Librarian Gao, arresting people? Even if we did something wrong, we ate and drank for free from philanthropist Qian and philanthropist Liu. We don't have the ability to repay them immediately. Don't tell me that you, surname Gao, don't arrest people as you wish. Don't try to slander us here. You are a black-hearted person. If we are unbearable, then you're even more unbearable than us poor people. That's right. Well said. Brother, you are right. Librarian Gao is scum. The crowd boiled over again. No one wanted to admit that they were scum. Moreover, everyone felt very wronged. Wasn't it because those officials didn't do a good job and harmed them? At this time, the officials were blaming them. It was simply ridiculous. Librarian Gao frowned. This time, he was more and more certain that the current situation was instigated by someone. Why didn't he see through it earlier? Even Magistrate Yang's scolding didn't make him see through it. Just as he was feeling conflicted and angry, a cry of alarm suddenly came from behind the crowd. Everyone looked back and saw the group of refugees who had rushed to the Yaman's entrance move to the sides. Two bailiffs came out, one on the left and one on the right, holding a tall and strong man in ragged clothes who was covered in blood. The man's hair was messy and there were whip marks all over his body. His head was lowered and he was unconscious. He was dragged forward by the bailiffs on his left and right. His feet were dragged on the ground, leaving a winding trail of blood. The refugees couldn't see what had happened clearly from afar, but those who were closer could recognize that the man covered in cuts and bruises was philanthropist Qian, who had given them food and clothes to wear. He was a man who was full of energy a few days ago. He came to the porridge factory early in the morning to personally cook porridge and scoop rice. He even helped to carry the grain. But now, he was tortured to such a state. The refugees who were closer to him had already started to cry. There were even some emotional people who rushed forward and fiercely pulled at the bailiffs on both sides. They screamed and cursed. "Why are you beating people? Why are you treating philanthropist Qian like this? You're a group of dog officials. You don't catch the bad guys and bandits, but you torture philanthropist Qian. You'll all die a horrible death." The two bailiffs had originally followed orders and braced themselves to bring philanthropist Qian out. Now that he was surrounded by groups of commoners, they were already impatient and hurriedly waved their arms like they were swatting flies. It wasn't easy to bring him in front of Warden Gao. The surrounding commoners were already in an uproar. They couldn't care less and threw Qian Gui on the ground. Just now in the prison, this man was full of energy and asked for wine and meat to eat. He even cursed the 18 generations of female ancestors of a black-hearted trafficker who specialized in kidnapping and selling children, causing dozens of children to die tragically. He even knocked out the man's front teeth. Who knew that once he left the prison and the Yaman's courtyard, this man would suddenly droop like a dog's tail grass that had lost its moisture. Now he was even pretending to be a dead fish, paralyzed on the ground and unwilling to move. Warden Gao's heart ached for his son. He didn't want to kill this fellow who kicked his son, so he kept him in the prison cell and slowly tortured him. What whipping, needle, tiger stool, all kinds of torture instruments, he wanted to let him taste them all. Finally, he wanted to cripple his lower body and break the bones in his legs inch by inch. He wanted to let him grow maggots in the prison cell, but he just couldn't die. Warden Gao felt that a quick death was simply being merciful to Qian Gui. But before he could use the torture methods he thought of, the commoners were already in an uproar. Yesterday, he had whipped this person dozens of times, and he was very tough. Now, in front of these commoners, he was lying on the ground, pretending to be dead. How could Warden Gao not be angry? Get up, stop pretending. Warden Gao used the tip of his foot to push the man lying on the ground. But in the eyes of the commoners, Warden Gao was humiliating and torturing him in public. He's already like this, and you still won't let him go. How can you be so ruthless? And what about philanthropist Liu? Why don't you let him go? Everyone's roars had already reached the limit. Everyone's anger could only be vented by shouting. Everyone's throat was dry from shouting, and they almost couldn't make a sound. In the quiet winter, where the yamen and rich families gathered, even if one person shouted loudly, it would disturb the tranquility of the surroundings, not to mention thousands of people shouting at the same time. Warden Gao's eardrums hurt from the roars. If it was said that when this group of people gathered in front of the Gao family's gate, it was already enough to make him tremble in fear. But now, everyone's anger was directed at him like a tsunami, causing him to be so frightened that he didn't know what to do. I didn't catch the surnamed Liu. I don't know where he is. And this person, he's just pretending. His life isn't in danger. Bullshit your mother's dog. If he's fine, why is philanthropist Qian lying on the ground and not getting up? Do you still have any sense of humanity? Let him go. Let him go. If he doesn't let him go, we'll go save him ourselves. Philanthropist Qian is already like this. Philanthropist Liu and that old madam who did good things before probably won't have a good ending. We'll go save him. We're not cowards who only know how to eat. The commoners roared like a surging flood, crazily rushing in the direction of the yamen. In the crowd, even Qin Yining and the others who had been staying in the corner were squeezed like a small boat in the middle of a turbulent storm. The people around Qin Yining tried their best to protect her, but they were all squeezed until they couldn't stand properly. Qin Yining tried hard to stabilize her body and said in a low voice, "The time is right." She turned around and whispered to Jing Zhe and Liao Zhibing, "It's up to you. Yes, Princess Consort, don't worry. We'll definitely take advantage of the chaos to rescue the old alliance chief." Jing Zhe and Liao Zhibing snuck into the crowd together and led a group of people in the direction they had planned beforehand. Chapter 691. Qin Yining was squeezed by the crowd to the point that her cloak was twisted in front of her, and her hood was hanging halfway on the back of her head. Master Zhong and the others were squeezed to the point that they almost fell, and they had to pull and support each other to prevent themselves from falling to the ground and being trampled on. She struggled to twist her body to look in the direction of the sound of horse hooves and tremors, and her heart was filled with hope. Because such a uniform sound of horse hooves and such a strong tremor on the ground could only be caused by a well-trained army. Qin Yining did not know if Pang Xiao would come. The situation in the barracks was not optimistic, so how could Pang Xiao privately mobilize the army? Wouldn't that be giving their political opponents something to use against them? But in the depths of Qin Yining's heart, she hoped that Pang Xiao would come. They had not seen each other for a long time, and she missed him, worried about him. Although she was very strong and had the ability to take charge of everything on her own, she still hoped that when she encountered trouble and difficulties, she would have a shoulder to lean on. The soldiers and horses were getting closer little by little, and the sound of horse hooves was getting more and more shocking. When the soldiers and horses got closer to the turbulent crowd, it was like a rushing river meeting a reef, and they quickly split into two groups, galloping left and right to outflank the refugees. The refugees' originally surging anger was now suppressed by the soldiers and horses that suddenly descended from the sky. No matter how useless the army was, no matter how incompetent the commander was, after these days of Pang Zhao's merciless training, These originally oily soldiers had also been trained to the point of oppressing people's hearts, especially now that they were not going into battle to kill the enemy, but facing these skinny refugees who did not even have the strength to truss a chicken. Some of the refugees who had been courageous enough to confront Historian Gao earlier were now intimidated by the imposing aura of the army. The clamor and cursing gradually died down, and the crowd froze in place. Looking left and right, looking around, everyone's eyes filled with fear. At this moment, a fair Ghana horse with shiny black hair came out of the crowd like Moses parting the sea. Pang Xiao was dressed in black armor, with a red gorilla cloak, and rode over majestically. The fluttering cloak spread out behind him, covering the horse's buttocks. The refugees had never seen such a mighty general, and they were all stunned in place. Qin Yining's almond-shaped eyes seemed to be filled with stars for a moment. She looked back at Pang Xiao with joy. Pang Xiao sat upright on his horse and looked around for a familiar figure in the crowd. After a while, his gaze finally fell on Qin Yining, who was in a very sorry state because of the crowd. Their eyes met, and Qin Yining couldn't help but smile like an innocent child. Pang Xiao's face was tense as he slowly urged his horse forward. The people blocking the road hurriedly moved aside, afraid that they would be trampled to death by this handsome black horse. The thousands of refugees were surrounded by the army, all looked up at the young general who was slowly stepping into the crowd on a tall horse. "Stop!" Pang Xiao reined in his horse and stretched out his hand to Qin Yining, who was a step away. "Still not coming over?" Qin Yining looked up at Pang Xiao's tense, handsome face. The person who looked fierce to outsiders was holding back a smile, but his eyes were clearly filled with joy. Qin Yining dared to guarantee that if Pang Xiao dared to let the people present see his true expression, he would lose all of his dignity. Qin Yining walked towards Pang Xiao and placed her snow-white hand on his large hand. Pang Xiao bent down and pulled her hand up. His other hand was around her waist, and he placed her in front of him to sit sideways. He pulled over his cloak and wrapped it tightly around her, hugging her tightly with both arms. Qin Yining leaned against Pang Xiao's strong arms and felt extremely secure. She could not help but rub against the cold armor on his chest. Pang Xiao said in a low voice, "If you have any problems in the future, let me solve it. Don't tire yourself out, and don't worry about me." Qin Yining's heart warmed when she heard this. She smiled faintly. "How can I not worry about you? After all, the situation is not stable right now, and you have not gained a firm foothold in the army." Pang Xiao also chuckled. There was an unprecedented confidence in his laughter, which made Qin Yining's heart skip a beat. Could it be that Pang Xiao had already solved the problems in the army? Pang Xiao knew that she cared about him, but he was also angry that she acted on her own initiative and worked hard, putting herself in danger. Only the heavens knew how terrified he was when he rode his horse over and saw her slender body being squeezed by the crowd, where she bumped into something or fell down and got injured. What should he do? While Pang Xiao was letting his imagination run wild, Qin Yining found that the situation was temporarily under control. She hurriedly looked at Liao Zhibing below. Liao Zhibing immediately understood and shouted loudly in the crowd. "So what if the army is here? Is the army an accomplice of Historian Gao? We have to save philanthropist Liu." The refugees who were intimidated by the army were actually a little scared. But people were like this. When a difficult thing was done by one person, it might be very scary. But when a group of people worked together to boost each other's courage, they would burst out with incredible courage. The people who were cursing Historian Gao shouted again, and there were many people who said together, "The officials don't give us a way to live. We're just a group of hungry people. How can we fight against the army? Starving to death is death. Fighting to death is also death. I don't want to live today. I would rather die here and save philanthropist Liu and the others. Right? God doesn't give us a way to live. I would rather die than kill Historian Gao." With nowhere to vent their anger, they were suppressed by the army that suddenly came. The surging anger was like a flood that met an obstacle. It was either completely blocked or broke the dam. Obviously, the army was not a strong dam. Hot blood rushed to the heads of the refugees again. At the same time, Pang Xiao sat on the horse and looked at Huzi and a few Jinghu Wei who were disguised as refugees in the crowd. Huzi and the others immediately moved like loaches in the crowd. Soon, they squeezed to the front of the yamen and led the refugees to charge at the yamen. Historian Gao was so scared that his face was pale and his body was about to go limp. Although these people did not charge at his house, it was still the yamen. Magistrate Yang had just warned him. Before he could think of a solution, these refugees had already charged at the yamen. How could he face Magistrate Yang in the future? His career would be completely ruined. Historian Gao led a few of his brothers and anxiously rushed to the yamen in an attempt to stop these refugees. But who were Huzi and Jinghu Wei? Although their bodies were dirty and their clothes were thin and tattered, their kung fu was solid. With the cooperation of Liao Zhibing, Jing Zhe, and the others, they quickly broke down the corner door of the yamen. A few people rushed in and lured away the bailiffs and doormen who were blocking the door. Some refugees came in and opened the door. The door of the yamen was immediately opened, welcoming everyone in. The refugees screamed as they rushed in. Panicked, Dian Shigao shouted, "Stop! Come back! All of you stop!" Seeing that the commoners had actually charged in, the soldiers remained seated on their horses, as if their mission was just to stand there. Seeing this, Dian Shigao couldn't help but cry out in anger. "What are you soldiers doing? Go and catch those stinky beggars." Pang Xiao snorted coldly. He spurred his horse forward, raised his hand, and lashed out with his whip. The tip of the whip landed on Grand Historian Gao's face. "Trash like you! How dare you criticize me in front of me?" Historian Gao immediately covered his face and howled in pain. His hands were stained with blood. When the citizens who had yet to rush and saw this scene, they stopped in their tracks and cheered. Some even shouted, "Kill him! Kill him!" They picked up stones and horse dung on the ground and threw them at Historian Gao. There were also some hotheads who did not know what was going on. They looked at the beautiful young general whose face was covered by a cloak in admiration. They could not help but be stunned on the spot. Some people even whispered to each other, "This general is a good person. Who is he?" Some people who knew what was going on were fearful. They trembled and said, "That is Prince Zhongshuan. He is Pang Zhishi who led the Tiger Army to attack our Dian." What? Such a handsome and valiant young ghost general who hated evil as if it was his enemy. He was actually the evil Pang Zhishi who they were so afraid of and could stop children from crying at night. Pang Xiao had never cared about how others judged him. He did not care about the various gazes and discussions. He sat on his horse and looked at Historian Gao coldly. Suddenly, Pang Xiao saw a tall and slender figure standing at the entrance of the yamen from the corner of his eye. The figure was clad in a blue gown. Blockhead! Pang Xiao's murmur entered Qin Yining's ears. She raised her head and looked at Pang Xiao. She immediately removed her cloak and followed Pang Xiao's gaze. She saw Mu Jinghu smiling and nodding at them. He then lightly jumped over the wall like a ghost and entered the yamen. Qin Yining was shocked. Her first reaction was that Tianjizi had also come. This was because Mu Jinghu and Tianjizi were inseparable. Mu Jinghu's mission was to protect Tianjizi from any harm. If Mu Jinghu left Tianjizi, wouldn't Tianjizi be in danger? "Young Master Mu has come here. I'm afraid it's not good," Qin Yining said worriedly. Pang Xiao smiled. "It's fine. Blockhead is trustworthy. I naturally trust him. He has saved my life more than once. I'm just worried about his martial uncle. Even if Tianjizi comes, I can make sure she can't do anything." As the two spoke, Historian Gao was already dodging left and right in a sorry state. The commoners were addicted to smashing things. They grabbed things to hit Historian Gao. After all, there was limited space in the yamen. It couldn't accommodate so many refugees. Therefore, most of the people stayed outside. They were just short of punching and kicking Historian Gao. The main gate of the Gao residence was tightly shut. However, there were many servants of the Gao residence who climbed up the ladders and climbed up the walls to look outside. When they saw their master being beaten so badly, they all shouted to inform Madame Gao. In the prison, Mu Jinghu, Liao Zhibing, Hu Zi, and Jingzhe had already successfully found the cell where Madame Zheng was being held. Seeing the wooden cage in the cell, everyone's eyes were about to pop out of their sockets. Hu Zi cursed, "Fuck. Damn it. Gao Wenyao is courting death. Is this how you treat people? Old Alliance Master, you've suffered." Liao Zhibing almost cried. Mu Jinghu didn't say anything. He drew his sword and used his inner strength to swing it. The chains on the cell door fell to the ground with a clatter. Chapter 692. Madame Zheng had already heard the commotion outside. At this time, she saw these people rushing in to save her, and she only knew Liao Zhibing. She couldn't help but be surprised. "Mr. Liao, why are you here?" "Old Chief, and Wang Yi asked us to save you. There are many twists and turns, and it's hard to explain. Old Chief, please leave with us." Madame Zheng was supported by Liao Zhibing and climbed out of the cage with difficulty. She was covered in dirt and had been in the cage for too long. She couldn't even stretch her legs and feet. At this time, she couldn't even stand up. The people were shocked. Hu Zi hurriedly squatted in front of Madame Zheng with his back facing her. "Old Madam, can I carry you out?" "You are. I'm Wang Yi and Wang Fei's bodyguard." Hu Zi had a dignified appearance and was very likable. At this time, when he smiled, he even revealed his sharp canine teeth. He looked like an innocent child who had not yet shed his childishness. This kind of appearance was the easiest way for the elderly to let down their guard. Madame Zheng's heart seemed to be wrapped in a hot spring. She was no longer pretentious and obediently let Hu Zi carry her. They walked the route that Jingzhe had already chosen when he was scouting. They avoided everyone's eyes and ears and took advantage of the fact that everyone in the yamen was resisting the attack of the refugees. They jumped over the wall in a deserted place in the backyard. They went through the back alley and directly ran 2 streets down to the carriage that Qin Yining had arranged here. Bing Tang had been waiting here for a long time. When he saw a group of people carrying a person from afar, he knew that the rescue was successful. When he took a closer look, he saw that the little beggar carrying the old Madam of Duke Ding was actually Hu Zi. His dirty face made Bing Tang laugh. When Hu Zi saw Bing Tang laughing, he also laughed foolishly. Seeing Hu Zi and Bing Tang like this, Jingzhe was always by Qin Yining's side. He knew the relationship between them and couldn't help but laugh. Madame Zheng also smiled when she saw the familiar Bing Tang. The atmosphere changed from one of panic to one of joy and relaxation. "Old Madam." Bing Tang bowed as he approached. "Miss Tang, please dispense with the formalities." Madame Zheng smiled and said, "It's been a long time since we last met. How have you been?" Replying to Old Madam, Wang Fei treats this servant like a sister. "This servant is fine. Wang Fei ordered this servant to wait here and check on your injuries as soon as possible. Old Madam, please get on the carriage first." Madame Zheng's heart warmed as if she had soaked in a hot spring for 3 days. She smiled and said, "It's hard for you to be so considerate. These days, Wang Fei has been so worried that she can't eat or sleep. Ever since she went to the cloth shop and found out about you, she has gone crazy. Every day, all she can think about is how to save you. She doesn't even have the mood to take care of her 2 brothers. Now that you are safe, we can all be at ease. Princess Consort can also sleep peacefully." Bing Tang carefully supported Madame Zheng and helped her into the carriage with Hu Zi. Bing Tang then entered the carriage and checked Madame Zheng's pulse to see if there were any injuries. Outside the carriage, Jingzhe and Liao Zhibing jumped onto the shafts and drove the carriage away. Hu Zi and Mu Jinghu looked at each other in tacit understanding and immediately rushed in the direction of Pang Xiao. At this time, the yamen was already in a mess. Pang Xiao protected Qin Yining and Master Zhong as they retreated from the battlefield. Within the encirclement of the army, Historian Gao and his subordinates were almost turned into clay figurines by the mud, horse dung, and cow dung thrown by the refugees. Although they had sabers with them, they still needed time to draw their sabers before they could wield them. The angry commoners vented all their anger and resentment on them. If it wasn't for the fact that there were too many people and it was inconvenient to surround them, and that the surrounding army made the refugees hesitate and retreat, they would have been beaten into minced meat long ago. Pang Xiao and Qin Yining looked on coldly from the side. Seeing that most of the people's anger had been vented, Pang Xiao then hugged Qin Yining and urged his horse forward and raised the horse whip in his left hand high up. The well-trained 1,000 soldiers and 50 Jinghu Wei immediately jumped off their horses and stepped forward. They shouted in unison, "Stop!" The sudden shout was extremely intimidating, causing the refugees who had vented a lot of their anger to be stunned on the spot. The mud in their hands even fell to the ground. Historian Gao and his subordinates were finally able to get up in a sorry state. They used their sleeves to wipe the dirt on their faces and spat out a few mouthfuls of mud. Historian Gao held his breath and shook off the dirt on his hands, then wiped his face. He then saw Pang Xiao sitting on the horse and angrily reprimanded him. "Your Highness, you're a little too timely in stopping them. Did you deliberately come here to laugh at us?" Pang Xiao raised his eyebrows and thought to himself, "Did this guy become stupid from anger? How dare you? Why aren't you kneeling when you see Wang Yi?" The Jinghu Wei shouted loudly. Historian Gao was shocked again. He didn't want to kneel, but his status was there, and he had no choice but to kneel. Just as Historian Gao hesitantly knelt down, the refugees behind him were much more honest. They were directly frightened by the Jinghu Wei's shout and knelt down uniformly. Pang Xiao looked helplessly at the pitiful refugees and said softly to Qin Yining, who was in his arms with heartache and pity, "I didn't mean to scare them." He then shouted, "Men, arrest Historian Gao and vent the anger of the commoners." "Yes, sir." The elite Tiger Guards responded in unison, and with lightning speed, they pinned Librarian Gao to the ground. Librarian Gao was dumbfounded. He struggled to raise his head and roared, "No, you can't treat me like this. I am an official of the Imperial Court. I am the local historian. I enforce the law impartially and focus on doing your Majesty's work. I didn't do anything wrong. How can you arrest me just because a group of poor beggars said something bad about me? I don't accept this. I don't accept this." "You don't accept this?" Pang Xiao carried Qin Yining and dismounted from the horse. He carefully put on Qin Yining's hood and cloak. Then, he leisurely used the horsewhip to strike his palm and walked towards Historian Gao, who was pressed to the ground. Historian Gao struggled to twist his neck and raise his head to look at Pang Xiao, but he only saw a pair of deerskin military boots. The young general, dressed in a scarlet cloak and black armor, looked down with disdain, his handsome face even carrying a bit of a smile. However, no one dared to underestimate his anger at this time, because the pair of phoenix eyes under his sword-like eyebrows were already brewing a storm even colder than the coldest days of winter. "Do you know who this king despises the most?" Pang Xiao waved his whip, and Jinghu Wei released his grip on Historian Gao. Pang Xiao lifted Historian Gao's chin with his boots and coldly patted Historian Gao's head with the tip of his whip. "The people he despises the most are cowards like you who bully the weak." Historian Gao's face was full of humiliation. He suppressed his anger and said, "I am an official of the Imperial Court. Wang Yi is treating me like this. Does he want to cause trouble in the old capital and make the Jinnan king unhappy? I said you're a coward. Why did you turn around and bite your master so quickly?" Pang Xiao said in a low voice and then raised his voice to point at the refugees kneeling on the ground. Although they are poor, although they don't have enough to eat or warm clothes to wear, they still have the courage of a man. They can't stand to see injustice. For their savior, they can raise their arms and cry out. Although their actions are a bit impulsive, but this is the strength of character of the people of Dezhou. This king admires them. Pang Xiao's low voice was very penetrating. All the refugees heard it clearly. All the refugees couldn't help but become excited. They didn't think that the legendary evil embryo who killed without blinking an eye was actually such a reasonable and courageous person. Pang Xiao lowered his eyes to look at Historian Gao. "And you? You think you're the local tyrant. You bully the weak, bully men and women. For your useless son, how many families have you forced to break up? I'm afraid you can't even remember how many bad things you have done. Tatan is now invading our country's borders. The people in the north have lost their homes. You have the strength to not fight against the foreign enemy. Instead, you are a tyrant. Someone like you who only knows how to use your strength to bully the weak. How can you be called a man? Your balls should have been chopped off and fed to the dogs long ago. Pang Xiao had been in the army for many days. When he communicated with those rough men, he couldn't speak in a polite manner. Moreover, when speaking with those uneducated people, it was not a good idea to speak in a polite manner. Therefore, Pang Xiao used the crudest and most straightforward words to express his views and attitude. He didn't give anyone the chance to misunderstand his actions and position. Well scolded. Wang Yi is wise. The emotions of the escapees were going through 1,000 twists and turns. At first, they thought that Wang Yi had brought his troops to suppress them. They were already in despair. They thought that they wouldn't starve or freeze to death, but would be killed by the troops of their own country. But things took a turn. This heroic Wang Yi was not the rumored evil spirit. He was actually a very reasonable person. He even stood on the same side as them. Thinking about it carefully, when the Zhou and the Yin dynasty were at war, Wang Yi was a general of the Zhou. Naturally, he would not show any mercy to the Yin dynasty. That was because they stood on different sides. But now, the two countries had become one country. Wang Yi treated them as if they were citizens of the same country. He would not bully the commoners. And the commoners didn't have to be afraid of a general who surrounded their own country. Many of the commoners, who had a deep-rooted impression of Pang Xiao, came back to their senses at this moment. They were no longer afraid of him. Instead, they felt that it was a good thing that their country had such an awe-inspiring prince who was good at war. The commoners immediately cheered and shouted, "Long live Wang Yi! Long live Wang Yi!" Qin Yining stood beside the Jinghu Wei people. When he saw this scene, he couldn't help but smile. Pang Xiao was a smart person. He always knew how to judge the situation. She did not discuss this matter with him, but the two of them had a natural tacit understanding. He could make use of this matter to not only rescue his grandmother, but also change the bad impression he had of the commoners. He could also build up his reputation. In the old capital, what Pang Xiao needed the most was a positive evaluation and reputation. Chapter 693. Qin Yining frowned and looked over. She saw Yu Qiyin and Gu Shixiang wearing thick woolen clothes, standing in a hidden corner of the street. Both of them looked very serious, and their brows were tightly knitted together, as if the sky was about to collapse. Qin Yining raised her eyebrows in confusion. Just a while ago, these two people were in high spirits and looked like the overlords of the old capital. How did they become like this today? Qin Yining looked at Dianshi Gao, who was prostrating himself at Pang Xiao's feet, and she understood everything. At that moment, Qin Yining was so angry that the roots of her teeth were itching. Previously, she only suspected that Yu Qiyin was behind her grandmother's arrest. Yu Qiyin and Gu Shixiang wanted to force Pang Xiao to do something overboard, so that they could use his mistakes to report him to Li Qitian and give Li Qitian a way out. But at that time, there was no evidence to prove that Yu Qiyin was behind it. Now that she saw Yu Qiyin and Gu Shixiang's expressions, how could Qin Yining not understand? Yu Qiyin had finally learned how to scheme, but unfortunately, they were now on the opposite side. Qin Yining took a deep breath and cleared all distracting thoughts. She looked at Pang Xiao and Dianshi Gao again. Pang Xiao was already half squatting and pointing his whip at Dianshi Gao's dirty forehead. He said in a low voice, "You are a Dianshi official, but you disregard the lives of the people. You disregard human lives for your own selfish desires and connive with your son to commit crimes. For the sake of robbing other people's property and wives and daughters, you have caused countless cases of injustice and falsehood. There is no meaning to an official like you. This king will sentence you to death today to avenge the people who were wrongly killed by you. You dare." Dianshi Gao anxiously began to kick his legs, but his body was stepped on by Jinghu Wei, so his struggles were futile. "I am an official of the imperial court. Although you are Wang Yi, you have no right to punish me. No rights. Pang Shao sneered. This king punishing evil is your majesty's order. Even if I kill you and report to your majesty will understand that this king is acting in an emergency. If I don't get rid of you, do I have to watch the people turn against me? Pang Shao looked around at the commoners and then at Librarian Gao. He reprimanded angrily. Look at the commoners you've bullied. Look at what they've become. Think about yourself. Don't you know how much you've embezzled? Do you want this king to send people to your house to copy it? Grand Historian Gao was so scared that his whole body started to tremble. This time, he felt cold from his hands to his feet. He didn't want to die, but he didn't want his entire family to die with him. Pang Shao knew exactly what he was thinking and used his family's lives to force him to submit. Grand Historian Gao's body started to tremble. In his fear, he couldn't even control his tongue. He could only shake his head and say that he was innocent. Pang Shao sneered and stood up. He waved his hand and ordered the people beside him, behead him in public. Yes. The crowd responded and immediately dragged Grand Historian Gao out of the crowd. Once he heard the words, behead him in public, Grand Historian Gao was so scared that his whole body stiffened. He cried out loudly that he was wronged. Yu Qiyan, who was in the corner, frowned. He stepped forward and was about to speak when Gu Shixiang pulled on his sleeve. Yu Qiyan turned to look at Gu Shixiang, only to see Gu Shixiang shaking his head at him sternly. Yu Qiyan pursed his lips. His eyes were full of conflict. He wanted to go against Gu Shixiang, but he was afraid that he would anger the old man. If he really angered Gu Shixiang to death, he would no longer have such a loyal and resourceful subject. While he was hesitating, Jing Huwei had already dragged Grand Historian Gao to the side. The escapees chased after them, craning their necks to watch the show. They were all cheering loudly. Jing Huwei pulled out his sword. The other two men threw Grand Historian Gao to the ground and retreated to the side. Grand Historian Gao trembled like a sieve. His teeth chattered and a stinky liquid came out from between his legs. Pang Shao turned his head away. Jing Huwei's men raised their swords. Stop! Who knew that just as they were about to raise their swords, a loud roar could be heard from outside the crowd. Jing Huwei originally had the opportunity to kill Grand Historian Gao first. However, when he thought about the current situation, if he rashly killed Grand Historian Gao, it would cause trouble for Wang Yi. Thinking of this, Jing Huwei's men could only temporarily put down their swords and look at the source of the sound like everyone else. The person who came was dressed casually and had an attendant with him. He looked like a rich scholar, but his aura was noble and extraordinary. Grand Historian Gao recovered from his shock. When he saw the person who came, he cried tears of joy and shouted, Magistrate! Magistrate Yang, save me. So this was Magistrate Yang? When Pang Shao and Qin Yining first arrived here, and the Yu Qiyan held a welcoming banquet for them. Except for Deng Minchong, the highest official in the area, Magistrate Yang was absent. Deng Minchong had been taught a lesson by Pang Shao, but this was the first time Magistrate Yang and the others had seen him. In their impression, this person did not care about his own affairs and did not want to get involved in the battle of the imperial court. He was a person who only wanted to protect himself. Why did he come at this time? Pang Shao said with interest, Your Magistrate Yang? Magistrate Yang walked quickly to the front of the crowd. His brows were tightly knitted. He suppressed his anger and bowed to Pang Shao. This official pays his respects to Wang Yi. Forget it. Pang Shao pointed at Librarian Gao, who was kneeling on the ground, and said with a sneer, Such a person with such a bad character is working under Magistrate Yang. Why hasn't Magistrate Yang disciplined him? Are you guilty of negligence as well? Magistrate Yang was so angry that his beard was crooked. This person was so shameless. He slandered him as soon as he saw him. Do you think it's up to the Grand Marshal to tell me who to use and who not to use? Magistrate Yang emphasized the words Grand Marshal. The Dezhou dynasty had just been established, so the status of the nobles and generals was still very high. However, the relationship between the civil officials and generals had never been harmonious since ancient times. The civil officials despised each other, and the civil officials looked down on the generals. The generals naturally looked down on the civil officials and criticized them as if they were watching a monkey show. Magistrate Yang mentioned Peng Zhao's position as Grand Marshal, which meant that he, as a general, did not want to interfere with the civil officials' employment. Peng Zhao narrowed his eyes and looked at Magistrate Yang's red face. He then looked at the group of refugees behind him and could not help but chuckle. This king naturally does not dare to tell Magistrate Yang how to use people. However, although this king is a general, he is also a cabinet minister. Naturally, he has the duty to inform the emperor of everything that he sees here. Now that Magistrate Yang is not strict enough, there are thousands of refugees in the small old capital during the new year. Moreover, because of Gao Wenyao, the people are boiling with resentment. Thousands of people have gathered to cause trouble. Could it be that Magistrate Yang did not see all this? Magistrate Yang just remembered that the person in front of him was not only Wang Yi, but also the Grand Marshal. He was also the Grand Secretary of Wuying Palace, who was personally appointed by Her Majesty. He had all the positions of the civil officials and generals. Magistrate Yang was reprimanded by Peng Zhao in public. How could he keep his face? Moreover, the old capital was under his jurisdiction. Whether it was good or bad, it was up to him to decide. Even if Gao Wenyao killed people and set fires, it was up to him, the superior, to deal with it. Why should an outsider interfere? If Peng Zhao successfully interfered with the matters under his jurisdiction today, wouldn't he be laughed at in the future? How could he establish his authority? How could he be an official? Peng Zhao had just arrived and wanted to interfere with his affairs before he had a firm foothold. Magistrate Yang would never tolerate him. If I don't do well, Your Majesty will discipline me. I haven't asked Grand Marshal Feng. I don't have the order to transfer people. Why did Grand Marshal Feng lead the army into the city? Do you, Prince Zhongshuan, have the final say in the transfer of the army? If you mobilize the army without permission, I'm afraid I have to report it to the emperor. Peng Zhao smiled with interest. He had underestimated Magistrate Yang. It seemed that this person was not a kind person. Magistrate Yang, can't you see why I'm here? He pointed the horsewhip behind Magistrate Yang and then pointed at Dianshi Gao on the ground. He sneered and said, "First, the old capital is in chaos. Even the officials under your jurisdiction can't do anything about it. If the army doesn't intervene, are you waiting for the protests to develop into riots? Second, your subordinates have committed crimes and caused the people to be angry. As an official, you don't do anything about it. Are you saying that the road is not fair?" The army entered the city for no other reason. First, it is to maintain the stability of the old capital. Second, it is to enforce justice on behalf of the heavens and get rid of that evil bitch to vent the anger of the people. Good scolding. The refugees heard Peng Zhao's sonorous declaration and shouted loudly. Magistrate Yang looked back and saw that the faces of nearly 1,000 people were filled with infatuation and worship. They were so excited that it was as if they had seen the arrival of a god. Magistrate Yang couldn't help but re-evaluate the god of war, Wang Yi, who seemed to speak coarsely but was actually very clever. He didn't rely on luck or military achievements to get to where he was today. He was a person who was very good at judging the situation. Now, his words had stirred up the enthusiasm of all the refugees. If he continued to interfere, what would happen? Magistrate Yang gritted his teeth and hurriedly said, "No matter what, it is wrong for the army to appear in the city without being mobilized. Moreover, Wang Yi is the commander of the army. Yet, he tried to interfere with the local affairs and even wanted to use the death penalty to kill an official of the imperial court. Aren't you overstepping your authority by doing this?" Peng Zhao frowned and looked at Magistrate Yang. After a while, he said, "So, Magistrate Yang, you don't agree to let this king deal with Gao Wenyao?" Magistrate Yang felt that something was wrong. Peng Zhao's attitude seemed to have changed too quickly. However, he couldn't say that he agreed with Peng Zhao. Magistrate Yang could only say, "Of course, without my order, the army should stay in the barracks. Don't enter the city and disturb the peace." "Okay." Peng Zhao's voice rose, and he agreed happily. He turned and smiled apologetically at the people who were on the verge of anger. Without saying anything else, he turned and put his arm around Qin Yining's shoulder and called for Jinghu Wei and the army he brought. Since Magistrate Yang insists, let's go. Yes. The army and Jinghu Wei answered in unison. In the silence, they got into formation and prepared to leave. The scene was filled with a murderous aura. Chapter 694. His words seemed to have opened the floodgates. Curses poured out like a flood, creating a clamor. All the refugees pointed at Magistrate Yang and cursed. Corrupt official. He must have received money from Mr. Gao. Historian Gao has done so many bad things. Little Wang, ye saw injustice, and you chased him away. Do you deserve to be a magistrate? Dog official. Officials protect each other. You don't give us a way out. Dog official. Beat him to death. Beat him to death. The anger of the refugees had been appeased by Pang Zhao's righteous actions. Who knew that Magistrate Yang's actions would push the anger of all the people to the next peak? Everyone grabbed mud and stones from the ground and threw them at Magistrate Yang. Magistrate Yang's attendants and guards hurriedly protected him. They opened their arms like old hens, afraid that the magistrate would be hurt. However, there was still a lot of mud and stones thrown at Magistrate Yang's face and head. Why had Magistrate Yang ever suffered such grievances? He hurriedly shouted, "It's not that I don't want to punish Historian Gao. It's Prince Zhongshuan who overstepped his authority. He go eat shit. You dog official, don't talk nonsense here." Before Magistrate Yang could finish speaking, he was hit in the face by a pile of horse dung. Ba 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 ba. Magistrate Yang wiped his face and coughed violently. He had never been in such a sorry state before. However, the people did not give up. They could not find anyone to redress their grievances. Philanthropist Qian was beaten to the ground and was carried to the side. He was still unconscious. They had no food, no water, and no warm clothes. They did not know where their next meal would be. It was so easy for someone to stand up for them, but they were rejected by Magistrate Yang. He said that he overstepped his authority. Wasn't he covering up for his subordinates? Their future was bleak. They had been bullied to this extent. Rather than silently starve or freeze to death, it was better to vent their anger now. The refugees could not take it anymore and rushed forward angrily. Some rushed into the yamen. Some rushed in front of Magistrate Yang and Historian Gao, and some rushed in the direction of Gao's residence. Not only that, the desperate refugees hated the rich and powerful families. Some of them even had thoughts of revenge and rushed to other unrelated families. Magistrate Yang saw this and hurriedly waved his arms. All of you stop. I will agree to punish whoever you want. Don't be impulsive. Don't be impulsive. However, in the chaos, who could hear Magistrate Yang's shouts? Everyone wanted to vent their anger, so they roared and rushed in all directions. Magistrate Yang broke out in cold sweat. If this went on, wouldn't the people near the Yamen's residence? That would be an unprecedented event in the past 100 years. He was just an obscure magistrate. Was he going to be recorded in the history books because of this kind of thing? Even if His Majesty found out, he wouldn't have a good time. Magistrate Yang looked left and right, not knowing what else to do. He suddenly turned around and happened to see Yu Qiyin and Gu Shixiang huddled together in a corner. Magistrate Yang was immediately furious. "Yu Qiyin, you bastard! I'm protecting your people, but now you're shrinking your neck and not caring. Who do you think you are?" However, the crowd was chaotic. No one could hear him, even if he cursed. He could not let this matter continue to develop. Magistrate Yang was as anxious as an ant on a hot pan. He could only squeeze in the direction of the army. His entourage and guards were busy helping him fend off the refugees who wanted to beat him up. Wang Yi, please wait. Wang Yi, please wait." Magistrate Yang no longer cared about his image. He shouted in the direction of Pang Xiao like a madman. His hair was messy, his clothes were dirty, and horse dung had been thrown at his face. However, he did not care about these things. Pang Xiao did not want to leave at all. Otherwise, their troop would disappear in the blink of an eye. Magistrate Yang would not be able to chase after them. Hearing Magistrate Yang's voice, Pang Xiao turned around. The Jinghu Wei immediately went forward to bring Magistrate Yang over, in case he was beaten to death by the refugees before he could speak to Wang Yi. Wang Yi, Magistrate Yang panted and said anxiously, Wang Yi, look at the chaos in the city. How can you just stand by and do nothing? Pang Xiao jumped off his horse. After standing still with Qin Yining in his arms, he turned to look at Magistrate Yang and laughed. Didn't Magistrate Yang say that this king is overstepping his boundaries? You told this king to leave, so this king had to leave. You didn't let this king interfere, so this king had to stay out of it. How come this king is standing by and doing nothing? Isn't Magistrate Yang too hard to please? Magistrate Yang knew that Pang Xiao was blaming him. He did not care about his face at this moment. If the chaos continued, his life and the lives of his family would be lost. Magistrate Yang hurriedly bowed and begged, Please, Wang Yi, let the troops go and quell this chaos. Otherwise, if it continues, the consequences will be unimaginable. Pang Xiao said, This is what you told this king to do. This king is not acting beyond his authority, right? No. Magistrate Yang was so angry that his stomach hurt. Pang Xiao turned to Qin Yining and said, Princess, do you think this king should do something? Qin Yining was actually having a hard time holding back his laughter at this moment. Pang Xiao was not a person who fooled around, nor was he a person who disregarded human life. In fact, he had already arranged for people to guard the doors of the surrounding houses. He did this just to scare Magistrate Yang and make him beg him. Qin Yining pretended to ponder and said, Actually, Wang Yi was framed and accused of overstepping his authority. I also feel bad, but Wang Yi still wants to cooperate with Magistrate Yang sincerely to ensure the stability of the old capital. All right, Pang Xiao smiled and said, Then I'll listen to Princess. The Jinghu Wei were already used to the love between Pang Xiao and Qin Yining, but the elites in the army did not know. They only thought that Pang Xiao was a tough man. Who would have thought that this tough man also had a soft side? Moreover, Wang Yi did not mind showing his love for his wife in front of outsiders. He was even willing to let her express her views on this matter. This kind of respect was not something that any man could give to his wife. These days, the men were already convinced by Pang Xiao. Now that they saw Pang Xiao doting on his wife so much, it seemed even more precious in their eyes. Everyone chuckled. Pang Xiao turned around and said loudly, Brothers, quickly go and stop the refugees. Don't stand here and laugh. Yes, the army, Jinghu Wei, and Pang Xiao had arranged for people in plain clothes to hide in the dark. They immediately took action. In less than half an hour, the riot scene calmed down. It was no longer the shock of thousands of people roaring. Only the occasional scolding could be heard. Pang Xiao stood in the middle of the open space and said loudly, Fellow villagers, everyone be quiet. Listen to this king. Huzi and Mu Jinghu, who were squatting in the crowd, looked at each other. Huzi immediately said loudly, Everyone be quiet. Listen to what Wang Yi has to say. Mu Jinghu also used his arm to nudge the person beside him. Listen to what Wang Yi has to say. Wang Yi is a good person. Some people mixed in with the refugees passed the message to each other. The emotions of the refugees quickly calmed down and everyone became quiet. Pang Xiao said loudly, Fellow villagers, just now Magistrate Yang told this king that he is willing to agree to any of your requests as long as everyone stops making trouble. This king thought that Magistrate Yang said this for everyone's sake, so he helped him to make peace with everyone. Look, if this continues, everyone's ending will not be good in the end. Also, those who want to rob others in anger, don't you think that's right? If they are caught by the imperial court, won't they be beheaded? You have been wronged and scolded others in anger. This is human nature. Anyone who knows will sympathize with everyone. But if everyone really becomes murderers who caused riots, then the only thing the imperial court can do is to send troops to quell the riots. In history, do you know what happened to the people who gathered to cause trouble? Pang Zhao's voice was loud and clear. His words were clear and easy to understand. When everyone calmed down, he gently explained the consequences. Although he did not say that he was blaming them, he was already very good at scaring them. The commoners were only blinded by anger for a while. Everyone was used to knowing their place. How many of them had the courage to accept the punishment of the law? Who would sincerely want to do evil? Who would not be afraid of death? Thus, Pang Zhao's words caused everyone to consciously shut their mouths. Furthermore, they all started to panic. Pang Zhao paced quietly, giving all the refugees enough time to think about the consequences if they continued to do evil. When everyone knew what fear was, he continued. So now that Magistrate Yang has agreed to your conditions, he is really taking care of everyone. Magistrate Yang is a scholar. He is a little pedantic, but his heart is not bad. If you have any difficulties, just tell me. I will be here as a witness. We have experienced war and famine. It was not easy to survive. There is no need for us to harm others. Don't you think so? Aren't we doing this for our wives and children to live a good life? Yes, we just want to live. In the crowd, someone covered his face and sobbed. Her crying really made everyone feel sad and shed tears along with her. Everyone started crying. They were hungry, braved the cold wind, made such a big scene, went through so many twists and turns, and almost lost their lives. Finally, they got a chance to negotiate with an official. Everyone had a lingering fear and panic in their hearts after surviving a disaster, as well as infinite panic and fear for the future. We just want to live and have a meal. We want Librarian Gao to get the punishment he deserves. We also want Librarian Gao to release the great philanthropist he has captured. Also, we want to have a warm place to live. If the conditions are not good, it doesn't matter if we adults are a little cold. At least give my children and my 80-year-old mother a warm place to spend the winter. Everyone was talking at once about their conditions. However, none of the conditions they proposed were excessive. Their conditions made Qin Yining's heart ache when she heard them. These were the simple people. They had no ambition, and they did not want glory and wealth. They just wanted to live and let their families live. They wanted to be filial to the old and let their children live a better life. To put it bluntly, what they wanted was the most basic dignity as a human being. But in this chaotic world, even such a simple wish could not be realized. Qin Yining lowered his lonely eyes, and there were tears of sadness in his eyes. The Yu Yin, who was standing in the corner and still in shock, also felt an indescribable sadness, pain, and deep guilt. These were all his former subjects. His subjects just wanted to live a decent life, but as an emperor, he could not do that. His country was destroyed, he lost his home, and he caused the death of his wife and concubine. Now, he was still at death's door, and he wanted to regain power in Dian. He did not have close contact with these people, so he had never considered their thoughts and feelings. In the cold wind, the Yu Yin looked at the refugees in ragged clothes, listened to their humble begging and crying, and for the first time, questioned his own heart with a heavy heart. Did he really do the right thing? Pang Zhao's heart was also heavy. He lowered his eyes and looked at Magistrate Yang, who had a tense expression on his face, and asked in a deep voice, "Magistrate Yang, did you hear that? You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.